Tsurine and Knoble. Written by Kyota Izuma. To hell with them all. Thalia Severance stood at the balcony to her great and beautifully colorful bedroom. She was dressed in her flowing sapphire robe, gazing outward at the destruction heading her way. It looks like they've made their decision. Cherry blossom eyes and flowing white blonde hair framed the woman's stern almond face. She turned and walked back into her bedroom before she looked to the rocking cradle with her sleeping baby girl. She was so oblivious to the strife nearing. Dearest daughter, so innocent and serene. Harbor me no hatred when you grow, I did only what I could. Tears came to the young mother's eyes, as it had only been 3 weeks since she gave birth. A legitimate heir to Saldian, but sadly an illegitimate heir to Audenhall. Dremond or Adair, you Cretan. They had shared the last 2 years and still he had not made the leap to wed her and bring their kingdoms together. Instead, she reflected on how she had spent 10 years building her kingdom and the trade routes that spanned from coast to coast. It had been her people that paved the way into prosperity. Audenhall and Florecia just happened to pounce on her in her moment of weakness. No man is worth loving, not when you can treat us like we're so disposable. My beautiful diamond, my heart, my life. Pale and trembling hands reached out and picked up the slumbering baby. She too had the white blonde hair and cherry blossom eyes. Their ethereal beauty was what set them apart from the rest of the world. Nearly twins, Thalia recognized as she saw herself in that tiny face. There were so few remaining of the Severance family, after Thalia's mother had been found to possess a fabled birthright of fire. Altica had burned in its attempt to eradicate all of the family, but they had failed. Even as Altica had burned, Thalia proved to survive and reign over her own kingdom built upon its ruins. She surpassed the powers of her lost lineage, but there she was, about to burn as well. Not you, my child. Only you will be able to survive with our name, Tsurine Severance, heir to 3. Saldian, Altica, and Audenhall. Only in due time will your greatness come to be. She could smell the smoke as she carried the slumbering babe to the top of their western tower. She moved slowly as though her limbs struggled to make the venture above. Take her and go. Thalia walked into the massive tower room and looked upon the prismatic dragon that sat perched apprehensively on the window. It was watching the danger approach, the fires below. Its slitted golden eyes shifted then and stared heavily at its human companion. She wrapped the infant up in a secure blanket and bound her to the reptile's torso, beneath its wing. Take her home, keep her safe, do all your magic can to protect her. The creature understood its companion better than anyone else. It saw deep into Thalia and beyond the ensuing danger. She wasn't well, hadn't been since she gave birth to her diamond. A silent understanding passed between the two of them. Thank you, Masoon. Thalia petted the dragon's head fondly in her appreciation. Masoon spread wing and took flight from the window with the still sleeping babe, flying over the chaos below as it headed toward the only home left, deep south and into the forest. The last place dragons could be found. 2 decades later, a white blonde with cherry blossom eyes would be wandering the thickest and untamed forest when she stumbled upon her first human. Just like her, they stood on 2 legs. Just like her, they appeared absolutely shocked to see her. It was an aged man with short grey hair. Please, don't go. There was no understanding his language as she turned afraid and ran away. However, after that first encounter, she slowly began to venture out of the dens housing her beloved dragon family to spend time with him. She sat there and listened to the man's strange language. He had dressed her in a long shirt that kept her covered and warm. Eventually, he said, I am Ralston Heriandrake. He pointed at himself, Ralston Heriandrake. He had become a great company, but it was only temporary. There came the dragons and their wrath, their desire to protect their human companion. Their screams filled the air as in dove the many dragons, of all different colors and with an imminent fury. They lashed out at the human and did not cease their attack until the man fell. That was when she dove in to protect him. What she didn't know was that in doing so, her dragon family would immediately rear back aghast and depart. A lone scream in the distance of the trees came from her beloved rainbow dragon. The scream was desperate, yet fleeting. Ralston arose, he sustained many minor injuries to his arms and legs, and he was quick to prepare to leave. The rest of that night was spent with him packing all his belongings. When it turned out that he was fine, Tsurine had bid him farewell in her customary way of waving before walking away. However, when she went to return to her dragon family's dens, the dens were all abandoned. Not a single dragon remained. Heartbroken, Tsurine made her way back to Ralston's camp, but he too was gone. Nothing remained of his stay except for a buried pit where his fire had been. So abruptly, he departed as though he had never existed. She never did find Ralston again. However, when he returned home to Norenrook, he posted his discoveries in any newspaper that would run his reports. Sketches of Tsurine and the dragons spread far and wide, which prompted many avid hunters to seek out the farthest and most dense forests of the south. Not only to find the last dragons, but the fabled Dragon Queen. Chapter 1. Enter Tsurine and Knoble. Wolves howled in the distance as he settled into his log fire. He had built a nice pit and had many assorted and dried fish roasting. There was a gentle stir in the leaves above that alerted the glacial blue-haired man to a foreign presence lurking. He was against the fallen tree that had apparently been struck down by some unfortunate circumstance. You may as well show yourself. He was smiling as he spoke, focusing forward to the blistering and popping flesh of his crisping meal. I'll share my fish with you, should you like. The invitation was sly, yet in earnest. He was the one that was traveling through a neighbor's territory. He knew it was only a matter of time before he encountered fellow warriors. However, the shadow above made no other sound or motion. The embers of his fire had begun to smolder out with the pre-dawn, and still the lurking shadow did not appear. Dawn arrived just as a great fog billowed in. The fog itself was not really unnatural for the area, but its thickness brought a noticeable eeriness with it. That was when she made a motion in the tree line. Hours had been spent hugging close to the tree, scarcely even breathing, as pain radiated throughout her entire being. It was that small motion she had made that gave her away, as suddenly he appeared right there. He stood tall as he shared the branch with her. However, he did not come off as threatening, just present. As much as he could have desired to be invisible with the hovering fog, it seemed to expose him so readily. Quite the circumstance. She stared directly at him with her tiger mask protecting her identity. There were rumored to be tigers in the densest parts of the region, yet they were so rare many believed them to be but a myth. Indeed, he replied to her, locking eyes with her, disguised in his own wolf mask. She had heard the howls of the wolves off in the distance. Had he brought his own along? Or were they the ones native to the area? Whatever shall we do? She inquired, steadily, bracing herself for the worst of circumstances. She was hardly in any condition to be going into battle, but she would do what she had to. There was a smile in his voice when he announced loudly, I believe we should enjoy the roasted fish from last night. A smirk followed. It won't take long to rebuild that fire. He was the first to leap from their perch. And with his descent went the dense fog that had surrounded them. As if on demand, it dissipated and left her feeling uncertain. He was again at his hand-dug pit where he struck his flint and steel together until a lovely fire erupted. When he took a seat upon the down tree, she could tell that he awaited his mysterious guest's company. Would he ask her why she hid in the trees all night? Would he ask her why she's in that part of the woods? Why was she falling apart? It took quite a few moments after the fire was lit for the white blonde-haired lady to decide she would join the man. Reluctantly, she breathed and calmed her anxiety as she leaped down. She sat on the ground opposite of him, keeping her mask on, and proceeded to stare at his mask heavily. How had he been able to detect her? Was he in control of the very mist itself? Her inquiries were left unspoken as silence stretched between the two of them. She eyed him as though she would pounce the moment he moved out of turn. She was like a tiger on the defense, hurt and exposed. Some time passed and he did not press for a conversation, as though he enjoyed the simple presence of the moment. It wasn't until the fish upon their stakes were presentable that he looked at her with the happiest and clearest blue eyes she thought she had ever seen. Fish. His voice was pleasant on the ears, and she was drawn in by his warmth. However, fish is nasty. The honesty came out so dry that the air itself felt stale between the two of them. As if she had smothered them both in a mountain of awkwardness. She stared as casually as she could before looking at the offered fish with stomach-churning disgust. I appreciate the offer. I bet you do, he teased gently as he couldn't help but to say, I bet I could make a fish you would enjoy. Perhaps not these crude friends, but something prepared properly. He chuckled at his harmless attempt at bragging. There was a silence that followed as she didn't laugh in return or contribute to the conversation. She just stared at him, like an owl. However, it wasn't just her that was feeling the blue-haired man out, he too was taking in the female and her social awkwardness. Is there a cause for your presence in our region? A concealed pain bled through the question as the white blonde-haired lady had to catch her breath. She didn't take her eyes off him, even as she did her best to use all her training to box up her dilemma. As we both present our masks, I can only imagine you've come seeking an audience with King Rulian. There was an answering nod as he finished a piece of his fish from beneath his mask. Yes, I have, he answered as he was making quick work of his meal. I've been sent by Prince Osiris Oradea to provide aid for our new ally. I'm an ambassador, representing my kingdom. I see, that's the marsh region, Audenhall, to the west. The region she had just come from. As if on cue, there was that throbbing that erupted in her side where she had sustained an injury. Her world seemed to go black for an instant. The pain knocked her air away at first, then she reined herself in. That was when she stood up, doing her best to ignore the growing problem to focus on the stranger man and what had to come next. She hadn't meant to stumble into him. Yet, there she was, and as such, it was her responsibility to ensure the traveler's safety to the city. Correct, he answered as he finished his fish. He remained sitting down, however he kept his attention on his guest. His eyes were present and his demeanor calm, but she could tell that he wasn't as oblivious as he was attempting to come off as. Well, she began, looking away from him to stare at the canopy above, beckoning the leaves for support. She received nothing but an answering rustling of leaves motivated by the winds above. I get the sense that you could use an escort. You've wandered quite a ways from the traditional route to the village. In fact, if you keep going this way, you'd end up in Norenbrug. Her observation was answered with his casual chuckle. Yes, well, I noticed a while back that the trail had certainly fizzled out to this. He motioned to the fallen tree, which wasn't the only of such misfortune. I'm ready whenever you are. He then buried his fire, pressing his boot down on the dirt to ensure absolute flame suffocation. Of course, he didn't admit that he was hoping he would stumble upon someone who would be kind enough to get him back on the right path. The roads of Floresia happened to be confusing, and sometimes they led to empty banks, or denser and more dangerous woods. It kept those who were native to the region safer from their enemies. Those who designed it thought that if there were 10,000 roads, but only a few that actually lead anywhere, to be quite brilliant. I'll get you to the gates, and from there you can get anywhere you need to. Come this way. She turned then and began to jog her way directly into the trees. Her pace was quick, yet the glacial-haired man never fell behind or complained. They made it through the remainder of the woods in a short time, and she came to a stop shortly before the edge of the trees. They'll check you in there and give you directions to wherever you need to go. I truly appreciate you taking your time to get me here. He clasped his hands in front of himself and gave her a bow of gratitude. I do hope we meet again, and you get healed up. The insert at the end caught her off guard, as she had felt she hid the dilemma well enough. She had even been able to form coherent sentences when she spoke. Yes, she hesitated for a fraction of a moment before bidding, good luck. She then slipped away into the trees to find her own way. Chapter 2. Pain. The pain wasn't getting any better. In fact, it was getting nauseatingly worse. She wasted no time and headed toward the nearest medical station. It was a few blocks away. She could make it. Tsurine, what's happened to you? Roylan was the first to see her as she stumbled toward the station's doors. The pain only intensified until her very legs gave way beneath her. Roylan was quick. He came to her aid and helped hold her up. It's my side. She managed to speak as sweat poured from every pore of her body. It streamed down her face from behind her mask. Never before had she experienced such pain. It had become so intense that everything around her began to blur. Valérine, get Dr. Hendra and the others. I'll get Tsurine to room 10A. He lifted her then as she thought she was going to pass out. Hold on, lady. Roylan urged his ally as he rushed through the hall to get her to the stated room. Everything was a mess of swirls and sounds that began unintelligible. It took all the strength she had not to scream out in agony. Something ticked then and her frame suddenly fell limp in her hospital bed. Chapter 3. An Order to Serve. I am Knoble Ventanova. I have been sent here by Prince Orodeo of Ordenhall to provide our Floresian neighbors assistance. As a new ally, it is in our best interests to represent ourselves as forthcoming and honorable, as well as willing to be useful in times of need and peacetime. Knoble stood in front of an aged man with a great beard. He was adorned in the Floresian emblem of a soaring dove with a peace leaf in its beak. Thank you, King Rulian. I hope to serve you well and represent my country aptly. He clasped his hands together in front of himself to give the man a modest bow before turning to depart the room. It was there that a man dressed in black and grey and wearing a black rat's mask silently turned to lead Knoble to where he would be staying. Thank you, King Rulian. I hope to serve you well and represent my country aptly. He clasped his hands together in front of himself to give the man a modest bow before turning to depart the room. It was there that a man dressed in black and grey and wearing a black rat's mask silently turned to lead Knoble to where he would be staying. This is where you will be allowed to live while you are here. We hope you find it suitable to your needs. There will be a cleaner once a week on Thursdays that will come and maintain the order of the home. Anything you do not want her to access, keep with your person or lock in the lockers in your bedroom. You can put any kind of lock on them that you see fit. Should you need assistance, or need anything, you can return to the Capitol building. They will provide you with what you need. Lastly, your escort will arrive at dawn to give you a run-through of the basics of our community. Until then, we hope you enjoy the many amenities we have to offer. Just like that, the figure turned and left. Knoble stood in front of the quaint home. He went in to find it was quite cozy. It had a small kitchen, a bathroom, bedroom and a living area. Everything was furnished, even the pantry and refrigerator. There were towels, soaps, and anything else he thought he could need. The bedroom was simple, and the bed looked incredibly comfortable. So much so that he made the decision to get cleaned up and lay down for a quick nap before exploring the village. Chapter 4. Hendra's Concern. Tsurine blinked open her cherry blossom eyes to stare up at the ceiling. She was in a hospital bed, hooked up to a fluid bag, with none of the pain from before. You're awake. Dr. Hendra came into the room then. He wasn't wearing his mask, and his brown eyes seemed extra warm right then. You gave us all quite the scare, but I think we've got everything under control for now. The way he spoke had her looking at him with a stone face. I've applied a medical seal to your injury, however I am uncertain what kind of injury it truly is. We are compelled to keep you under our close observation for a time, but our king has requested your presence. There was a heavy silence then. It prompted her to stare at him harder, and I don't know what you were doing in Ordenhall, but I have reason to assume this injury is a result of that visit. With that, I am not inclined to know what sort of operations our king has you risking your life for, but be careful. There are curses in this world that make even the holiest of idols flee for the hills. Your life has just begun, and it shouldn't be squandered. Stunned into a different sort of silence, Tsurine blinked in her surprise. I appreciate your concern, Hendra, she answered simply. There was no reason for her to contest what he perceived to be her reality. I believe I should pull myself back together and go see him. No further additions were made as she awaited her release. Hendra's presence without his mask made her uneasy, as it was very seldom that she saw anyone in their position without their mask. It felt too intimate. She herself seldom removed her own, even when in slumber, or in the privacy of her own home. Even then, she had it on, as anyone who knew her knew she would be remiss at the removal of the mask. It was her identity, her reason for existing. Perhaps, he answered with a hint of resentment in his voice. Your numbers are stable, but I recommend you take it as easy as you can over the next couple days. That seal may, or may not hold up. It's a mark I've never seen before. Either way, your body needs rest to fully recover from the strain it's putting on you. Hendra had always been known as a very caring person. But in that moment he was making sure that she knew he was serious. So serious, he must have been on high alert for the moment she awoke. His dread for her going back into a mission so soon resonated. The disappointment and anger was written well on his face. Thank you, Tsurine answered as her white blonde hair fell in disheveled strands from her deteriorated bun. She stared ahead as Dr. Hendra released her from her tether. Truly, she looked him in the eyes as she turned to put her feet on the ground. There was a moment there where she thought the world was going to tilt sideways, but she quickly regained her bearings. After doing so, she departed the medical unit without another glance back. She could feel the many eyes from the resident nurses as they stared holes into her back. The doctor had suspicions, no doubt ones that he had shared with his staff. Chapter 5. Fire. It wasn't a matter to her as she made her way then to the Capitol building. She undid her hair on her way, pulling it back up into a better messy bun. Those that saw her probably thought she looked hungover, or as though she had woken from an eons-long hibernation. Was it always so far to the Capitol building? She wondered as she finally arrived and made her way up to the front desk. Tsurine, Amfla's expression was surprised. You look like you got tackled in the streets. Are you all right? She asked. Surely, King Rulian wouldn't want to see you like this. That's unfortunate, as I'm a busy woman. He'll either see me as I am now, or not. Tsurine snapped at the innocent desk lady, aggravated by how exhausted she was from walking such a short distance. How could she be so winded? I will, won't I? It would so happen that at that moment, King Rulian, the man in the wolf mask, and two other escorts, approached from behind her. I would hardly say you're presentable in your current state. There was a condescending undertone, which was deflected right off of Tsurine. You knew where I was and still summoned me. This is me being summoned, my lord. Tsurine's answer was simple as she stood at attention in front of him, and his company. However, her retort was frowned upon by most in attendance. It wasn't every day that one freely inserted their opinion into an answer with their king. The annoyance passed quickly then as the king's demeanor lightened up and a grand smile filled his face. She's been quite the lippy one since joining us. Either way, she'll be your escort for now. Maybe you can tame a portion of her fire, Knoble. There was a booming laugh that followed that was echoed by the other two escorts. Knoble simply stood at a casual attention, his eyes were squinty from smiling beneath his mask. I can hardly imagine doing such a thing. You know what they say about the scorn of a woman. Knoble's casual response had the king laughing even more. Even Amfla's expression had lightened up and she was smiling at the boisterous moment with their leader. I love it, well spoken and witty. King Rulian shook himself then and his joking was instantly set aside, a stern look landing on the white blonde. Tsurine, take 3 days to show Knoble the wonderful amenities we have. That should be ample time for you to rebound. Now, off with you both. He waved his hand at him, waving him away, before turning with his escorts to resume his routine. Amfla stared heavily at Tsurine, disbelieving the exchange that had taken place in front of her. There was a moment where all three of them stood in an awkward silence. That was when Amfla was the first to resume her work, leaving Tsurine staring deadly at Knoble. Exhaustion kept creeping up in waves, and she could hardly understand what was happening. Let's go this way, she finally said, and Knoble followed her out of the building and into the busy stone streets of Floresia. The city was grand and beautiful with its many trees and stone buildings. The roofs all around the city were made of wood treated with a fire-resistant coating that their region was known for and exported frequently. As they went about their way, it dawned on her that it was a new day. She hadn't focused much on it until then. She shook off the creeping feeling of panic and focused on the mission at hand. Escort the wolf-masked man around the kingdom. I'll show you the fountain. Easy enough. Its marble glimmer attracted the eye of most tourists. It's quite the beautiful piece of work. Knoble answered easily, making it not so obvious that he was taking in her current state. I was able to make some interesting discoveries yesterday. Many of the merchants in the area are quite kind. There he was subtly letting her know that they were already on a familiar path to him. Mr. Moroxa makes the best rice treats, Tsurine admitted, realizing then how famished she was. As if on cue her stomach gurgled as if to agree with her sentiment. Ah, well if you have the time, we could stop in for some breakfast. Seems we have 3 days of this, so we may as well make the best of it. Starting with your rice treats. He exuded a contagious energy, and somehow managed to keep the mood lifted. Even though he clearly saw what was in front of him. If that's what you'd like to do. Tsurine's voice trailed off as she watched her blue-haired companion. He was already walking in the direction of the shop. Sounds like Destination 1 is just ahead. There was a hesitation as he waited for her to join him. I was fortunate enough to try one of his raspberry pies. He said they're in season right now. As they approached the shop, Knoble opened the door and held it open for her. Tsurine, thank the sky you're finally back, Mr. Moroxa explained from behind the display case next to the register. His face lit with a fondness that a worried father might express toward his daughter. And, you look like hell. What did this man do to you? There was a stern look at the two of them, putting them on the spot. The two of them froze instantly. Knoble held his hands up as if to proclaim his innocence. Tsurine on the other hand balked. He did nothing. She managed through the tightening of her throat from her sudden burst of anxiety. Actually, I was hoping to show him your rice treats. She moved the conversation along easily enough. Mr. Moroxa winked then, letting them both know definitively that he was merely jesting them. I didn't think so. Actually, you've got a pretty good escort here, Knoble. Tsurine is one of our finest soldiers. Mr. Moroxa bragged as he bagged up more than a dozen freshly baked rice treats and handed them to Tsurine. However, it was Knoble who put his hand up to pay. It happened so quickly, she hadn't even had a chance to reach into her vest pocket. You don't have to, Tsurine attempted to object. Don't worry about it, it's nice to be treated once in a while. There was a warmth exuding from the stranger man as Mr. Moroxa accepted his payment without any argument. The two of them were being uncannily kind and she felt an overwhelming amount of emotions all the way down to her knees. Tsurine stood and stared at the two men, deadpanning them both as she struggled to be thankful. I really do appreciate the kindness, she said tightly as she held the treats close and turned to take a seat at one of the many tables. Her preferred spot was adjacent to the corner booth. It gave her the perfect view of all the villagers that passed by, living their ordinary lives. Knoble followed and sat adjacent to her so she could still see out of the window. She didn't know what to say as she unpacked the treats in surprise. There's so many. She laid 5 of them out on napkins for Knoble first. Then, she laid 3 out in front of herself on a napkin as well. Thank you, they look delicious. Knoble took hold of and examined the small, golden, and crispy bread. They were dusted with a touch of powdered sugar, and before he knew it, he was watching Tsurine devour hers. Careful there. Tsurine had already eaten 2 before he ate his first one, and was finishing her third. She could be seen smiling as she lifted her mask to eat. Forgive me. I might eat all of these, she admitted, taking a moment to hold onto the bag that contained all the glorious goodies. Want these, too? He offered her the napkins after he finished his one. You're not hungry? She asked in return, her eyes locked to the treats. Actually, I had a large breakfast while waiting. He cut himself off abruptly. Help yourself if you want. There was a gentleness to his offer that had her lifting her eyes to stare at him for a moment. Typically, an escort is required to greet their guest at dawn on the morning following their arrival. It was a duty that all members of the military were required to do at least once a year. Seeing as it was late summer, it had been almost a year since her last escorting mission. She wondered then just how long had Knoble been waiting, and how come he had returned to the Capitol building with the king himself. The way they had strolled in earlier let her know they hadn't been expecting to come up on her. Thank you. Tsurine didn't know what it was, but there was a feeling that had her heart fluttering in her chest as she finally accepted the treats. She wasted no time and ate them in a matter of moments. After finishing those ones, they sat there in a silence for a moment. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, more so one of habit. She felt that maybe he was as accustomed to silence, even among others, as she was. Many of the masked elites were nearly mute, however that wasn't always the case. She kept her hypothesis to herself as she casually continued to eat one treat here and there. It probably wasn't the best first meal of the day, but it was her first meal in a day. Finally, feeling satiated, Tsurine looked to the last 5 goodies in the bag. There's another place that I'd like to show you, Tsurine offered as she rolled herself out of the chair. She rolled the bag up and stuffed it into a pocket on her black pants for later. If you're ready. The way she could feel him staring at her, taking in her disarray, while remaining silent about it, had her feeling nervous. It reminded her that when last they had seen each other, he had been just as kind. His way of not ridiculing or bringing attention to her circumstance was noteworthy. So much so that she didn't understand the modesty. He could have been like Amphla, King Rulian, and Mr. Moroxa who shared their observations unhinged. However, he didn't. All right, let's go. Knoble arose as well and turned toward Mr. Moroxa. Thank you, sir, the aged man answered back with a nod and a wave as the young duo began to depart. You kids stay out of trouble. I'll have raspberry breads ready tonight if you make it back around this way. Tsurine's mouth salivated at the temptation as she walked from the front door and looked back at Knoble. I know where I'm coming back to later. There was excitement at the thought of the raspberry bread. She loved anything bread, whether it was fried or baked. Add raspberries, it was a heavenly combination and her taste buds could hardly await. Sounds like he knows what you enjoy, Knoble mentioned as he followed her out into the streets that were continuing to fill as the day made its way along. Where would you like to go now? A silence followed before Tsurine answered. She had thought about how Mr. Moroxa had been one of the first friends she made in the village when she arrived. It had been 3 years prior and he had seen her wandering the streets like a lost soul and ushered her in. Ever since then, he had become a person she visited quite frequently. He knows I value his craft. She didn't elaborate, but thought about how it didn't matter what he made. If it was a bread, she would be in to see what smelled so nice. After they had departed down the road a ways, she pointed to the mountainside that protected the city to the west. The towering peaks were hidden behind the higher elevation clouds, but some areas showed the snow and how many of them were coated in it. There's a spot I want to show you. From there you'll know where everything is. Could she make it all the way out there? She looked to the west and toward their destination. Surely so. It was quite the trip, as it took them venturing up high into the mountains. A few miles out, Tsurine had Knoble follow her into one of the most dense areas he had seen yet. He stayed close, until there came a sudden, yet inconspicuous break in the trees. There in front of them was the ledge of a beautiful cliffside overlooking a massive cavern beneath it. The cavern was hidden from view by the angle of the mountain and the surrounding trees. However, the cliffside could be seen from the heart of the city if one was looking for it. Just don't fall in, Tsurine warned as she stepped carefully out toward the ledge ahead. It was positioned just so that the trees didn't obscure the view over the kingdom. They could see the 4 watchtowers and see the day's traffic coming and going through the main entrance. It's beautiful. He was stunned by the gorgeous view of the city. He pointed toward the eastern portion. That's where they have me staying. It wasn't all that far from one of the main watchtowers. That's right, Tsurine nodded. That's where we allow our allied ambassadors to stay. They're actually real nice. She had stayed in them during the first few months after she arrived. However, she had found much more comfort in the trees beyond the city gates. Knoble had stepped away and was gazing down into the cavern. Not only is it a nice overlook of Floresia, this cavern must be ancient. Do you have a problem with people going missing out here? Shaking her head, Tsurine then shrugged her shoulders. This is an area most locals are unable to access. There's a barrier that keeps most from accessing these parts of the woods. The barrier is like a rerouting tool. It gently guides wanderers back onto the more busy pathways of the kingdom. I come out here when I want to be closer to nature. I can see why. Knoble was watching Tsurine as she stood on her ledge. Many of her long white blonde hairs were blowing in the wind. He noted that even if she was in a physical disarray, she stood tall and confident. It's peaceful out here. They hung around long enough for him to take in many of the foreign sounds of the region as they enjoyed each other's company. Perhaps we should call it a day. The sun was already beginning to end its journey in the sky and he could only imagine how tiring the endeavor out to the cliffs had been for her. Yeah, there's bread waiting for us at Mr. Moroxa's bakery. Tsurine chimed as she stretched where she was. Will you be partaking? She asked curiously as they began their descent from the mountain and beyond the magical barrier that led them back into the city. You know, I think I will, Knoble answered with a smile under his mask. I'm sure Mr. Moroxa is waiting for us as we speak. It was a companionable endeavor back to the bakery. They chatted casually about small things, like the weather, and the cavern's potentially hidden secrets. She admitted she had never ventured down into its depths. When they arrived to the bakery, the door was already locked and the shop closed down. He's never closed before the sun goes down, she said calmly, although a feeling swept over her that something wasn't right. There's still smoke emanating from the chimney. Knoble's demeanor became more rigid as he nodded. I'll search this side and meet you at the back. He pointed in the direction he was going in as they parted ways. On his side, the windows were all closed, yet they were covered over by curtains. He couldn't see in very well at all, so he continued to circle around. Tsurine wasn't at the back when he got there, so he kept going around to barely see her feet slip in through a broken window. Mr. Moroxa, Tsurine called out as she began to search through the building. She looked under the tables up front before going back to check the kitchen and office areas. He's not here, she announced to Knoble who was at the broken window. His office is open. Another oddity as she climbed back through the broken window. Unfortunately on the way out she caught her leg on the broken window. Damn, she cursed as she sat back on her butt once cleared to evaluate the injury. It wasn't so bad, but the lack of outpouring blood had her concerned. Knoble was there in a moment. Here, hold still. This will cause some discomfort. He wasted no time as he pulled a medkit from his person and began dressing her injury. He rinsed it and patted it down before putting a glove over his left hand. A couple stitches were required and he did it so quickly she was stunned. So he was a cook, and a medic. When he finished, he put his things away and offered her a hand up. The whole moment left her gawking at him. His kindness and his efficiency was impressive if nothing else. I know where his home is, so I can go check there. If he's not there, I can ask his wife where he might be. Tsurine had to force herself not to choke over her words as she stared up at Knoble. Thank you, I appreciate your capabilities. It was a strange feeling that filled her stomach. Even if it turns out to be nothing, I would find comfort in knowing he is safe. Me, as well. So, allow me to accompany you. Knoble nodded at Tsurine as she turned then to lead him to Mr. Marox's home at the most northern part of the kingdom, next to the Great Wall and the furthest watchtower of the city. It was one of the oldest areas with the aged stones showing their wear and tear of the decades through their many cracks. Knock, knock. Tsurine tapped on the door and there were several long moments before an elderly woman came to the door. Oh, Tsurine. You look like you've been busy today, she greeted with a smile, looking over to the stranger man with his blue hair. Welcome, sir. What do I owe this visit? It was Tsurine that answered. Well, I was wondering if Mr. Maroxa might have returned home early today. She watched the confusion appear on his wife's face as a sinking feeling began to arise between the three of them. No, I don't believe so. I visited him around the lunch hour and he was in the process of baking some of his raspberry bread. Why, has something happened to my husband? The deep frown on the woman's face hit Tsurine hard. We went to his bakery just a bit ago and his chimney was still smoking. The front door was locked, but there was a broken window and I climbed in to see if I could find him. But, he wasn't in the building. His office was open, but no one could be found. The explanation had Mrs. Marox's face paling. Oh my, she swayed then, and it was Knoble who stepped forward first to brace the woman. As if he could sense the very moment of her need. Here, can I help you to a seat? His gentleness of the situation allowed him to guide her to the kitchen to sit on one of the stools there. Is there any reason that Mr. Maroxa would have left his bakery early today? The question came from Tsurine, who was hesitant to walk into the home uninvited. However, she tried to stay close by in case either of them needed assistance. Her arms were crossed as she held herself close. She needed the comfort as she realized she stood before a woman she respected so much while being so unpresentable. Her clothes were dirty and her hair was hardly in a controlled disarray. No, not that I'm aware of. He seldom leaves the bakery before dark, and when he does it might be to visit the king upon request. Or to come visit me should I be ill. There was a quiet moment as she seemed to debate a decision in her mind. Yi Fat's been worried lately. He doesn't eat as much, or rest well at night. I've noticed, but he has yet to bring up his concerns. Mrs. Maroxa held her forehead then. Will you come right over when you find something out? The pleading eyes were watery, and Tsurine bowed forward. I promise. There was a tiredness that exuded from Tsurine, however she knew she could not leave this situation unresolved. She wouldn't want to. I'll be in communication with you as soon as I am able. Her answer was of the utmost honesty. I'll help. Knoble approached Tsurine then and his eyes were as stern as she had seen him yet. Like swirling storms of emotion. I'll accept it. Directions were unnecessary as they began to jog their way toward the Capitol building. They weren't so terribly far, so it was a better idea to swing by there before going back to the bakery. That way they could cover all their bases as they went. Amphla, Tsurine spoke as she and Knoble walked into the Capitol and right up to the desk clerk. Has Mr. Maroxa requested an audience with King Rulian today? No, not that I'm aware. The king has been out on holiday today. All of his meetings were postponed that I'm aware of. Why? Amphle's eyes spoke volumes as Tsurine watched her take in all her disarray. Not only was there that dismissal for her unkemptness, but there was a concern for the local bakery that everyone loved. He's not at the bakery, the front door is locked, the chimney is still smoking, there's a broken window, and the office is open. Knoble and I went to Mrs. Maroxa's home and asked if she had any information. She said he had been worried and not eating, sleeping, yet he wouldn't tell her why. Now we're trying to find him. Mrs. Maroxa said he might have left to visit with the king, but that now is not possible. I believe we need to put out a missing persons alert. So many words, such a short time, she felt winded from her breakdown. Amphla nodded and took down the notes given to her. I'll get some operatives out on the field shortly and send a message out to King Rulian. Thank you, Tsurine answered. I'm going to return to the bakery and meet the others there. There were no protests as Tsurine looked to Knoble, who was continuing to follow her. Let's hope that Mr. Maroxa has returned by the time we get there. He reassured her, yet she felt it fall flat when he became distracted by something behind her. A billow of smoke, darker than the evening sky, filled the air in the direction of Mr. Maroxa's bakery. Far more smoke than was customary, or normal, as the city was designed to be flame-proof. The two of them began to run toward the shop, even as flames billowed about and licked the very air around it. Such an angry blaze, it could only be the work of powerful magics. Who would target an innocent baker who did nothing but keep his locals fed and happy? That was when a scream was heard from deep within the building. Mr. Moroxa, appalled, Tsurine gasped out as she recognized the elderly man's voice. No. She felt that moment when a decision had to be made, and she didn't hesitate to rush to the house and dive into the flames of the broken window. You can't die. Her heart was in her throat as she prayed, please let him live. Don't, Tsurine. Knoble's shock from behind wasn't enough to keep Tsurine back as he reached for her arm. He couldn't believe his eyes. She dove into the flames without even a second thought. It was but a moment later that two individuals came crashing out of the front door of the blazing bakery. Coughing and groaning, Mr. Moroxa was in such terrible condition that Knoble set about tending to his wounds right away. Mr. Moroxa, hang in there. Help is here, Knoble spoke as the elderly man reached forth with his roasted skin to grab his arm and pull him close. They want her, he groaned to Knoble. They want her. The terror on the man's face was haunting as he grappled at relaying his message. It took all he had left to speak his last words as life fled from its bodily host, escaping to the next world right before Knoble's eyes. Tsurine. It wasn't the first, nor the last time that he saw life flee to its new home. Even so, he was gentle as he lay Mr. Moroxa's body down on the ground. His concern then turned to his escort. That was when 8 other masked individuals came rushing into the area. 5 of the 8 encircled the bakery and performed a series of maneuvers before clapping their hands together. What came then was a powerful display of magic. Water materialized from the air and came about to consume the bakery and put the flames out in a magnificent display of control and unity. When everything was contained, the same maneuvers were performed and ended with a clap that caused the water to dissipate back to where it came. The other 3 masked units went to Tsurine's aid. The precision in which they acted together, the quickness in their actions. Knoble did what he thought was best as an outsider and stayed knelt down where he was. He was more help if he stayed out of the way of those who were designated to the situation at hand. Knoble, a tall brunette with the darkest eyes and an elephant mask, approached from the group of 5 nearest the bakery. I am Captain Griant Haloof. Thank you for your assistance. I will make sure that your aid is noted. Also, I'd like for you to explain what it is that transpired here. Knoble then explained to the captain what they had spent the last few hours doing. At the end of his explanation, Captain Haloof had his arms crossed and was nodding his head. By that time, several more dozen units had flooded into the area, locking it down from the growing prying eyes. Again, thank you. We will take it from here. A bellow erupted out from behind him then as a unit went barreling head over heels past them. Shocked, they both turned to see Tsurine standing in the middle of the 2 remaining units. Tsurine, Captain Haloof bellowed out as Tsurine turned on another of her allies, punching him away with so much force that they too skid away. I told him to get away, she screamed out in return, all the pain and exhaustion boiling over as she prepared to assault the last remaining unit. Luckily for him, he backed away willingly and gave her space. Her mask was smeared with blood and ash, her clothes melted and exposing her burnt and cut flesh. A portion of her tiger mask fell from the bottom right, exposing the line of blood that flowed from the corner of her mouth. Yet, she stood tall and confident, defiant and ready to destroy anything in her path. Captain Haloof moved forward with a hand out in front of him. Tsurine, you're in no condition to be acting this reckless. The groans of the units from behind him only spurred on his gentleness. They were attempting to calm the anger of one who was in extreme pain and overflowing sorrow. Tears mixed with her blood as it dripped from her chin. She faced Mr. Moroxa's still body and felt the wave of failure as it swept in mercilessly. I just want confirmation. The way her shoulders sagged and her breath left her, everyone could feel her sorrow. I have to tell Mrs. Moroxa. However, she was exhausted and in so much pain, she could feel herself swaying on her feet. Captain Haloof put his arm out for Tsurine to hold on to. We'll get everything taken care of, Tsurine, including you. I'll report back to Mrs. Moroxa. Knoble spoke to Tsurine. He felt the least he could do was fulfill her promise to the new widow. The relief he saw in her eyes after that allowed for Captain Haloof to pass her off to another unit. Exhaustion overwhelming her as she allowed herself to be guided away. I'll be there in a few, take care of the rest. Get those 2 checked over as well, Captain Haloof said to another tall individual with a more slender build. They were wearing a coiled-up snake mask. The captain then approached Knoble again. I'll accompany you to her residence. I've got a few more questions for you. They departed together as the many units on site began to clear the area and transport their people toward their respective medical units. Chapter 6. Getting back to normal. Knoble had a different escort the following day. Standing at attention outside of his residence at dawn was that familiar person with the coiled snake mask. Good morning. I am Lyndon, second captain to Unit 9. I was instructed to be your escort for the duration of your probation period. Captain Haloof has decided that after this probationary period, you will be assigned to Unit 6 as a community observer. King Rulian's assistant will be in contact with you at noon to give you further instructions. Thank you, Knoble answered before following up with, how is Tsurine doing? She is alive and being tended to by our finest medics. Unfortunately, her condition has left her unable to complete her assignments. Her answer did not welcome further questioning, which he understood, to some degree. Are they assignments I might be able to help finish? The offer seemed to surprise the second captain as she gave a curt gesture. If I'm to be here, I can help. Knoble's readiness caught his escort off guard. So far during his stay in Floresia, things seemed to be active in most aspects. Even in the recent fire, once the units arrived, they flooded in with a knowing of how to make quick work of the situation. It was quite similar to how ants gathered to their meal. After visiting with Mrs. Maroksa the night before, Knoble could really use some missions to keep him occupied. His mind's eye couldn't stop reflecting back on his smoldering companion and the pain she must have been in. After that day he found himself doing more than simply enjoying the city. He needed work to keep him distracted as days turned to weeks. No matter the redundancy, or how small the job, he kept his time well occupied. Chapter 7. Unexpected Reunion. Several weeks passed and Knoble settled into his routine of rising early to complete minor missions around Floresia throughout the day. He did anything from catching people's pets, to cleaning garden beds, to reporting to the king himself on his experiences in Floresia. Overall his stay was turning out quite productive and pleasant. Those he assisted were appreciative, those that he met were kind. It was the last day of the month when King Rulian summoned Knoble to his office at the Capitol building. Good afternoon, Knoble, the king greeted, reaching over the table to shake the man's hand. I believe we have come to the end of your stay, and in return we would like to send our own ambassador to accompany you back to Audenhall. I do hope your people will treat her with an equivalent decency. Having shaken the man's hand, Knoble nodded at his request. Indeed, whoever you would like to send, I would personally do what I can to ensure their well-being while in Audenhall. As allies, we hope to extend to you aid when you need, while hoping you will come to our aid in return. If that means we station ambassadors in each region, I'm certain Prince Osiris will engage in negotiations. Perfect. Then, enjoy your day today and I will see to it that your escort will be waiting by the Floresian main gates. I expect to hear weekly reports from my ambassador, do see to it that they get them done. I have gone about clearing up our connecting trade route and stationed many units along the pathway. Yes, sir, Knoble bowed. It was shocking how quickly things were moving along. Just a month prior they were simply neighbors. Now they were coming together so well. He turned away then and took his leave of the room. The door was just coming closed behind him when he caught a distracted Tsurine coming around the corner from the stairs. Tsurine, Knoble announced, jolting her into an attention's pose. He noticed when her eyes didn't meet his. It's good to see you're well. He saw that her hair was cut short and that she wore black gloves over her hands. And you? She was more quiet than before. It was then that she sheepishly met his gaze. There was a new layer of pain to her eyes, but there was also a triumph. She stared up at him for a moment before saying, it's been a trying few weeks, but I believe things have come a long way. There was a hesitation as she then looked toward the king's doorway. He knew he was keeping her from meeting with the king, but he couldn't miss this last opportunity. He was going to apologize to her, instead he changed his mind. I'm departing tomorrow. I don't know if we'll meet again, but if you'd like to get some dinner later, I'll be around. Not that he wanted to sound like he was taking her on a romantic date, but as friends. He hadn't seen her in so long that there had been days that he feared the worst. No one ever told him one way or the other, even when he asked. It was always the same answer, we will see. He had feared some days that maybe she made it, but hadn't made it altogether. Shaking the feeling, he stepped out of her way. Knoble had gotten his closure either way, she was well, even if traumatized. He at least knew that she was on her path back to normalcy. Maybe, Tsurine answered simply as she bowed to Knoble. Thank you, she finished ducking herself down some before she entered the king's office. The exchange had been so abrupt and Tsurine's discomfort had him believing that perhaps she had been well for quite some time, she just hadn't wanted to see him. It dawned on him slowly as he departed the building. He felt himself growing ill as he understood the surmounting guilt that followed after such a great failure. There had been a long stretch of time when he too lived with such unredeemable regrets. It caused him great sadness to feel the depression had dug its claws into his ally. He wondered if she would allow it to devour her. Or, would she be strong enough to see the waves through to the other side of the many tomorrows to follow? He didn't want to focus on the direction his thoughts were taking him, so he went about taking on his daily missions. Amphla and he had become quite acquainted over the last few weeks. Their mornings were not complete without them getting some words in. Where am I to go today? He asked her with that familiar smile to his voice. Well, you could head over to the eastern wall and help clean up a portion of cattle pins that have been knocked loose over the last day. Amphle's cheerful demeanor had caused him much comfort over the last few weeks. Even if they only interacted the 1 or 2 times a day, it had been enough to keep his energies high enough to continue the monotony. With a shrug, fair enough, Knoble agreed and turned to head out the door when Captain Haluf and his second Captain Linden appeared in front of him. Knoble, if you have a moment, we would like to speak with you. Captain Haluf was the one to speak, reaching out his hand to shake. It has come to our attention that this is your last day in Floresia. We would like to thank you for your energies and efforts. If all your people are much like you, I believe we will be able to make much of our alliance. A figure wearing a maned lion mask came walking into the capital then. Knoble, the man asked, outright ignoring Captain Haluf. I am Hendra Halibut, lead medic of Unit 9. When you have a moment, I'd like you to come by the medical unit. That was all he had to say as he gave a casual nod to the captain and his subordinate. Good evening, Captain, he bid as he left. Captain Haluf watched the doors close before looking over to Amphla, who talked at Knoble. Apparently you've become quite popular now, she teased casually before returning back to her work. I'll pass that mission over to someone else. Knoble nodded. I understand, even when he didn't really understand. He was simply going to continue operating in order. First Captain Haluf, then Dr. Hendra. Knoble's answer was followed up by Captain Haluf continuing where he left off. That was all that we had to say. Take care, Knoble. The duo departed down the way, heading up the stairs for their next meeting. With that taken care of, he departed to the medical unit. Upon entering the great stone building, he was struck by how bright the place was. Can I help you? A young lady approached as soon as she saw him walk in. Her demeanor was kind, and he noticed that she had the most beautiful green eyes. I'm looking for Hendra Halibut. At the name, she looked him up and down before waving him to follow her. He's down this way. They walked down a hallway and took a left before coming to a cafeteria to the right. Dr. Hendra, you have a guest, she answered simply as she turned to leave the two men alone. Ah, that was quick. The man had his mask pulled fully to the side so everyone could see his face as he ate his meal. I was hoping I'd be able to get these last few bites in. But, you're here, take a seat. Rich dark brown hair and the warmest dark chocolate eyes, Hendra exuded an air of genuinity and intimidation at the same time. I've heard that you will be escorting Tsurine back to Ordenhall, or vice versa, and I needed to let you know a few details that may not have been brought to your attention. The doctor was speaking quickly between his bites. Getting ready to fill Knoble in. Tsurine has been stricken with an incredibly powerful curse, one that she obtained while in Ordenhall. We do not know what the curse represents, or what will come of it. However, we are in the process of tracking the individual who has caused this affliction. All we've come to discover so far is that their name is raised, and they're building their numbers in the hardest to reach areas of Western Ordenhall. There was a silence as the doctor finished his meal. Unfortunately, there's a lot that we don't know about Tsurine, as she simply appeared one day some 3 years ago. There's a lot of distrust for her among our many ranks, however she has proven to be quite the human. I hate to see her life wasted before she's had a chance to live it. Alas, King Rulian puts her in many dangerous situations, and this is perhaps the most dangerous. Dr. Hendra was staring at Knoble intensely as he spoke. His intentions very may well be to use her to draw out these enemies, and I need for you to let your people know. This could drive a massive wedge into our alliance if Tsurine is lost in your region. King Rulian could use that as means to invade, and wreak havoc where he shouldn't. It's what he did to Saldian to the south. The information was taken in and Knoble nodded. There had been speculation about what had happened between Florisia and Saldian. Now he had some confirmation. I've promised the well-being of whoever the attending ambassador is. If Tsurine is indeed my escort, I will do everything in my power to ensure her safety. I'll speak with Prince Oridea and I know we will be able to come up with a plan. I truly appreciate your contribution. Knoble bowed to the doctor as they both came to rise. Hendra put a strong and heavy hand on Knoble's shoulder. I can tell you are a strong and considerate young man. Your kindness extends to those you hardly know, and it's admirable in a time when many are war-torn and jaded. The two lost to the thrill of battle to regain their bearings in peace. I'd hate to see either of you lost to these uncertain times. With that, the man gave Knoble's shoulder a squeeze before letting go and walking away. At the doorway, he turned back once more to say, good luck on your journey. Knoble was left standing there by himself in the break room, staring at the doorway which the doctor left through. There were so many things going on now, and with all the extra knowledge he had just obtained, he would have to take some serious time to figure out what he was going to do. I'm not going, Tsurine told King Rulian. What? You can't not do as I order you, the king said easily as he sat in his gold and ruby chair that sparkled with his outstanding wealth. You forget who granted you clemency to live in this kingdom. On top of that, I granted you innumerable opportunities to rise through the ranks of my most trusted subordinates. You cannot simply deny my orders. Not when I've been so lenient in your time required to recover from misfortunes. Tsurine stared darkly at the king as she stood where she was. Her stomach was burning with anger and her hands were sweating with residual rage. You've shoved me into the gullet of the lion, you've subjected me to this curse that causes me pain constantly, and now you require that I return to the beasts who have done this to me. What for? To die? I value my life, and you've requested far more of me than your most loyal subjects. Your clemency is coming at the cost of my very life, and I'm here to protest that. The king arose then, his demeanor becoming daunting and aggressive. I don't know who you think you're talking to, but I am the king of this region. I am king. I am the one who decides the fates of those in my command. It is not for you to come in here and challenge the direct orders I have given you. Unless you are seeking the path toward treason, I highly recommend you recount what you've said and heed this warning. You will do as I say, or you will be forced away. Tsurine was staring at him with her eyes harboring every ounce of disdain she could muster. Yes, King Rulian. She conceded with a great bow, causing him to return to his seat. Leave my sight. Do not return until you've completed your mission. Anger permeated from the king. Even so, his leniency with the young woman had far exceeded his leniency towards many others. When she turned and departed, he turned his attention to the duo standing in the corner of his office. It was the leader of Unit 9 and his second in command. For 3 years the duo had been doing intense investigations into who the young woman was and how it was that she came to be in their kingdom. They had only recently discovered some invaluable information from Dr. Hendra, who happened to be the one that brought Tsurine to them 3 years ago. You had better be accurate in your reports, Captain Haluf. I'm sending one of my prized soldiers into the unknown on your recommendation. King Rulian's tone grew serious as he turned in his chair to face them, his arms crossed over his abdomen as he leveled his eyes with them. If your assumption turns out to be correct and she is the daughter of King Oradea, Hall will be severely indebted to our generosity toward her. However, Raised must be aware of the fact that time is of the essence if he wishes to apprehend her. He has moved, and if he acts before we can establish our truces, I'll get my retribution. Whether be it through thorough annihilation, or through negotiations. The agitator has already cost me a valuable baker. The weight of the comment landed firmly on Captain Haluf, who had failed in keeping Mr. Maroxas safe after alerts were set off that intruders were in the city. Captain Haluf nodded then. We believe that the young man will do well in her transportation. Alongside our reinforcements on the trade route, the path should be smooth. As soon as he gets her to Hall, they'll be on their way to returning their princess home. There was a silence that stretched then, as they stared toward the doorway that she had left through. What's astonishing is that she did everything she could to save Mr. Maroxa. I can't say many others would have run into fire for their ally like that. It was a testament to her natural loyalty and how far she could move if she adored a person enough. But, wasn't that true for most? The day continued on, and eventually Tsurine found herself sitting on a bench at the westernmost park. There were dozens scattered around the city. That one was particularly quiet at the moment. It was just the stray cats, some birds, and the occasional deer that meandered by. They were plentiful, and it was against the law to hunt near the walls. Dread kept growing as she knew she couldn't get out of returning to Hall. There were bouts of anxiety, of moments she couldn't breathe, and then there was that damned mark on her side. She contemplated her circumstance and could only bend over to hold her masked forehead. Things were escalating out of her control and she couldn't understand what her future held. There was no one to turn to. Either way, Tsurine sat up to stare ahead and focus on the overgrowth and serenity of those existing together without a care. She envied the fauna and flora, just going along with the predetermined destiny. A sigh left her lips as she stood from the bench and turned back to the busy streets ahead. She should be taking this time to get some sleep, but there was no way she was going to be able to get any rest with her skyrocketing anxiety. She decided then that maybe she would walk around for a while and see if she could find Knoble. Maybe take him up on the offer to have dinner together. She hadn't seen him in so long that seeing him outside the king's door had triggered that part of her mind that got caught up thinking. Thinking about Mr. Maroxa and the fire, the destruction within the bakery, the recovery she had thereafter. Even then, she looked to her hands that were still covered in their insulated gloves. And, her hair, her beautiful hair. Hours slipped by and she found herself settling into a quiet pasta house alone. It was getting late, and she hadn't found Knoble throughout the afternoon. She also hadn't felt comfortable enough to visit his residency to see if he was available. So, there she was beneath the lovely blue lanterns of the pasta house. She was just settled into her disappointment when a familiar voice came from behind. Is there room for one more? A tired Knoble approached with that familiar smile to his voice. His hair was all over the place, well, for a moment. He took a seat next to her when she did not protest and proceeded to redo his hair into his typical high ponytail. I thought maybe you got busy, Tsurine offered gingerly as she took a bite of her buttered noodles. That was when the hostess took notice of Knoble and came over with a menu. She handed it to him when she was close enough. Welcome, sir, what can I get for you to drink? We have a lovely raspberry tea, if you would like. That would be fine, thank you, Knoble answered as he held the menu in his hands. I actually fell asleep. When I awoke I saw the sun was setting, so I came out to see if you might be about. His admittance was innocent and Tsurine couldn't help but smile mid-bite. That's okay, rest is important. It was true, and after she spoke it, she felt his eyes staring heavily at her. There was a different kind of energy radiating from him in that moment. It really is, not that I suppose you would know. His tone was teasing, but she didn't know what to say in response. Knoble let her know how he felt while not actually letting her know at times. Even though she understood, she also couldn't help but bite herself back when she noticed one of her habits had caught his attention. And, as of late, she hadn't been sleeping much at all. There was a quiet that settled between them that granted the hostess her opportunity to bring Knoble his beautiful, berry-filled drink. Have you decided what you would like? Yeah, let's try these spicy shellfish noodles. Feel free to make them extra spicy. The hostess gave a short laugh at his bravery. Okay, just know we are known for our spice. Miss Tsurine here may have to catch you a water bucket. I'm sure she'll be great to have in that time of need. Knoble's charisma brought out the charm in everyone around. It was a way about him that had Tsurine wondering how he could effortlessly care so much, while being so humble. Yours looks delicious. What is it? He asked then, drawing her attention back from her observations. It's just buttered noodles with some herbs. Nothing too fancy, but I like it. The answer came out more tired than she had intended. She was done with the day, wanting to just go home. I'll have a carb overload and sleep like a baby. She tried to make light of her exhaustion, but Knoble didn't take to it as readily as she thought he might. Something had changed since the last she saw him, but she couldn't figure out what. Here you go, sir. The hostess came then again with a boiling red bowl of the spiciest meal Tsurine had ever seen or smelled. It nearly knocked her out of her seat as her nose cried out at the invisible flames. To the cook's grace, it was a vibrant and beautiful dish with its chili peppers peeking out to say, hello. A garnish of cabbage and orange citrus beckoned their patron. Ooh, Knoble made a noise of excitement as he proceeded to squeeze the orange over the dish. I think my nose hairs just melted. He laughed out as he grabbed his fork and his spoon to dive in for a healthy first bite. It was bizarre to Tsurine how he would use his spoon as a support unit to spin the noodles around the fork. She looked at her caveman method to scoop and chomp and wondered if she was eating her noodles wrong. OWHAA. Knoble's ears would have released steam if they were able to, and it was quite the sight to behold as there were nearly a dozen people in attendance of the performance. Everyone was looking at the visitor with a smile on their face. Tsurine herself was smiling as she watched the display. She couldn't help but think that one of the perks of eating behind a mask would be that no one got to see the truly messy and wet experience of eating something so intensely spicy. The red and puffy lips, the vibrant and watery eyes, it was its own thing. Tsurine passed Knoble napkins throughout the moments, and she noted that those in attendance were all chatting about the enjoyable experience. Knoble proved he could handle his spice by eating his entire bowl. I know I'm going to regret this tomorrow, but it was so good. He sat back in his chair, stuffed, doing his best not to overcrowd his partner. That was fun, Tsurine said lightly as she got a box for the other half of her meal. When the hostess came by with their tickets, Tsurine made sure to intercept the lady and lay enough money down for both of their meals. Shocked, Knoble protested, no, wait there. You can't. He had stood almost all the way up and reached like he was going to take that money away, yet the hostess was quick as she turned with her generous tip. Thank you, Tsurine. The hostess fled, leaving Knoble to gawk at Tsurine and her quickness. I knew I would have to be fast. Tsurine sounded happier than she had since the moment he met her, which caused him to burst out laughing. If I knew you would do that, I would have bought something cheaper. Shaking his head, he finished standing then and stretched his arms upward, clasping his hands above his head. Thank you for the meal, Tsurine. He conceded easily enough, his shoulders shrugged out in his appreciation for her kindness. His own exhaustion from what had been put on him recently had been mentally draining. I know, I wanted to make sure to do something nice for you before we departed tomorrow. At the mention of departing the next day, Knoble looked at her with that different intensity in his eyes. It takes nearly 3 days to get to Ordenhall, Knoble stated flatly. We'll make good time if we get ourselves some horses for the first stretch to the border. That'll cut the longest stretch down. That sounds good, Tsurine agreed, having not thought about taking horses, as she seldom rode them. They wouldn't be able to use them in Ordenhall though, the marshes were far too hard to navigate without boats and skilled drivers. Thankfully, the trade routes between their two regions were becoming more established as the weeks went by. Things would be safer now than they used to be. We should plan to leave early in the morning. That way we can make the best of our daylight. Knoble was watching Tsurine as she had suddenly become very still. Her one hand was holding onto the table, and her opposite arm was wrapped about her abdomen, as if she were hanging on for dear life. Are you all right? He asked with a renewed seriousness. Yeah, she bit back a breath in an attempt to overcome the sudden burst of pain. Her eyes had locked to Knoble's and she knew he was onto something. Even so, she managed to regain herself in record time as she uttered, just a gas bubble. She did her best to move on like nothing as she reached for her box and prepared to leave. They were walking out of the noodle shop when Knoble came to a stop. He knew that Tsurine had lied to him, but he didn't want to say anything inside, as causing a scene was not his nature. However, outside, he felt he had much more room and comfort. Thus, he began, Tsurine. Yes, there was a hesitation as Tsurine turned to look at Knoble. The tone he used in that moment differed from the many others he had used over all their time spent together. It was more concerned, yet more stern. Knoble needed to set a boundary if he was going to have any hope of keeping her safe moving forward. He resorted to the only thing he knew to tell the truth. I know about the curse. He watched the sudden change in her demeanor. Her eyes visibly flattened and she became rigid, like a cat with its flattened ears, defensive. I know that it causes you pain, and I know you've been concealing its effects since the first time we met. So, please don't lie to me. As your escort moving forward tomorrow, it's my responsibility to ensure your safety while in Hall. If I do not know what you need, I cannot help you as effectively as my mission requires. Tsurine stood with defiant eyes aimed at Knoble. She didn't move for a long moment, as if frozen by the mention of her ailment. How do you know? A glisten came over her eyes as she stared at him from behind that damned mask. He couldn't tell what emotion she was trying to conceal, but he did know that he had struck a nerve. Dr. Hendra Halibut, Knoble answered. He told me that you got the mark from your trip to Hall. Her shoulders sagged then, an uncertainty overtaking the defensiveness she had assumed. As if the last barrier between her and vulnerability had been smashed. What else did he tell you? I can tell you what I can, however, I don't believe we should discuss these matters here. He didn't know what ears may be around, but Dr. Hendra had told him what he did in private. So he followed the model and wanted somewhere more quiet. We can go to my home, Tsurine answered with a nod in the direction of Florage's main gates. I don't live in the walls, so we'll have more privacy. Not many could find her home, in fact, she had it pretty well hidden in the dense woods. Knoble was surprised, but did not protest. Lead the way. The gates had not closed yet, so they had no issues leaving. They wound their way down the main road, then they turned off to a trail. Then, they were walking along what looked like a bear's pathway. The paw prints that lined the way were massive with claw marks accenting each pad. Knoble's instincts were on high alert and he soon came to wonder if the paws they followed weren't even that of a bear, but more menacing. A large cat of some sort? The very hairs on the back of his neck began to stand on end as his apprehension grew. It were as though they were being watched by something in the shadows. There was no confusion in direction from Tsurine as she continued to guide Knoble along. That was when the trees broke to expose the smallest clearing. Watch your step. Tsurine walked forward and suddenly there were stairs leading downward. They went down about 20 feet and to Knoble's surprise, the earth above was supported by hundreds, if not thousands, of stones. The door below was made from one sizable chunk of bark that had been whittled down to fit the entrance. I must have been a mole in another life, Tsurine said dryly as she lit a couple candles to illuminate the lovely three-room den. Fur lined the floors, but in neat squares. There was a log couch, a small furnace and vents throughout the ceiling with hanging strings to control the airflows. This is quite unique. Knoble was impressed by the dwelling, and from the looks of everything she had done it herself. As a scout, it wasn't that easy to spot the clearing. Had a tree or two been left standing, perhaps it could have passed by his glance. It serves me well, as I don't need much. If you need to use the restroom, you'll have to go out there. She pointed to the front door, and out to the woods. I can't say my amenities are as modern as everyone else. You choose to live out here, instead of living in one of the ambassador homes? Her bizarre behavior was met with intrigue instead of disgust as he took a seat on the third floor. His legs crossed out in front of him as he relaxed in the space provided. With the candles set about to light the main room of the complex, she came back around to sit on the floor across from him. I prefer my privacy, was her simple answer. I hated being so close to people and the noise they make. She elaborated after a moment of silence. Out here, the simplicity of nature is alluring. Nodding at the explanation, Knoble sighed. I told you I would tell you what I know. He mulled over where to begin. That night when Mr. Maroksa passed away, he reached out to me and told me that the invaders were after you. There was no sugarcoating what was to be said and Knoble hoped that Tsurine would understand his bluntness. Following that, Captain Haluf accompanied me over to Ms. Maroksa. He told her that it was a tragic accident, however, I knew better. He paused because he had met eyes with the newly widowed woman. It wasn't an accident and she knew that. Knoble admitted. She knows that whatever he was paranoid about had come to cause trouble. His way of putting it mildly had Tsurine frowning more than anything. It was terrible what he must have had to endure on her behalf. And the place had been upturned. Tsurine added, when we visited earlier that evening and I went in through the window, everything seemed to be in order. However, when we went back and everything was on fire, nothing was as it had been. I didn't know that, he admitted, but he hadn't ever received an incident report from Captain Haluf. That was when he moved into what Dr. Hendra had told him. He told me that Raised is the one who has cursed you, that he has been assembling troops in the hard-to-reach western region. I'm uncertain what to truly make of everything, but as soon as we get to Hall, I'm going to relay what I know. The silence that stretched between the two of them was heavy. Tsurine weighed everything she had just heard, but didn't show much of a reaction outside of her eyes becoming distant. Raised, she uttered, as if not knowing his name. Is that all? Came her eventual question. That I'm aware of. My question now is what is this curse and what do you know of it? Knoble had a way of being blunt, but hardly rude. I was bitten by an animal. Tsurine finally admitted. I don't know what kind of animal, but it was large and fast, made of fire. As soon as it bit me, it ran away and left me writhing. I retreated and made the trek back home. The actual mark itself didn't appear until I arrived back to Floresia, and then the pain emanating from it incapacitated me. That was the night I found you, and I didn't move in the tree. I don't think I could have moved. She brought the story around to work into their timeline. We must have left Hall at almost the same time to meet like we did. Knoble sat staring at her, without much to say. His arms were crossed over his chest and his posture was so straight, it made her feel like she had a hunched back. About Dr. Hendra, I know he has the best intentions. She didn't really know what to say. Honestly, she felt raw about so much about herself being revealed to someone she didn't really know that well. He's overstepping some stones though. I am not at liberty to tell my king that I will not do something. Believe me, I tried. Even if I don't want to go, I'm ordered to go to Hall. There was some resentment in her words, but it was so half-hearted. She didn't have the energy to be angry. Whatever it is that's going to happen, I can only go with what is in front of me. Right now that is a simple mission. Accompany you back to your home, stay for what sounds like a month, then return to my home. Of course, I'm required to send those ridiculous reports. Why don't you want to go back to Hall? Is this because of raised? Knoble asked. Have you met this person? When Tsurine did not answer immediately, his suspicions grew and his eyes narrowed. Is that why the animal attacked you? She was staring at him so heavily, that he thought she was going to burn a hole into his very person. What? He finally asked. I cannot speak of these things with you because I don't know. There was a weighted sorrow in the way she said it. All I know is I cannot go back in time to change my circumstances. I must continue ahead to complete this mission. Even if I should perish, there will still be a beautiful tomorrow. Knoble was kicked in the chest by the sincerity that exuded from Tsurine, as he had seldom encountered individuals with such clarity of their own existence and their possible demise. He, too, knew what she spoke. However, you can't believe defeat is possible. You always have to fight hard, that's how we survive. He knew all too well what kinds of trials one could endure in order to survive. I know, but it's not an impossibility, so I accept it. Tsurine yawned then, and Knoble realized the hour was getting pretty late. Indeed, he conceded easily. Well, I think I should be heading back to the village. You can stay in the next room if you would like to. It's not much, but there's a table and bed. Otherwise, I'll escort you back. The offer hung in the air, even as she rose to her feet, ready to leave. Seeing as we are departing in the morning, and I left no belongings behind in the residency, I'm not against getting rest here. Knoble looked to the room that she pointed to then and stood up as well. You can take that candle. There's a small table beside the bed. He gathered the candle up as he made his way to the room where he noticed there was another bark door. It's probably best that we each get some rest then. We should plan to leave once the birds wake. Knoble stood in the doorway, looking toward Tsurine. I hope you sleep. Tsurine went and gathered up the other candle. I'm halfway there, she stated with a sort of sigh, resigning herself to the idea of laying in her own bed for the last time in a long time. She watched Knoble slide his door over before moving to her own room. There was a bed piled high with furs and a small side table for her candle. As soon as she blew it out and laid down, she was sleeping soundly. Late into the night, Tsurine was woken up by a swelling pain in her side. It forced a gasp from her as she balled up into herself and held on tight. The pain sustained itself longer than before, and a spike of panic split through her as she rolled from her bed to lay on the floor. Just breathe, she reminded herself as she laid flat on her back and closed her eyes. It was but a short time later that the pain ebbed. She was left drenched in sweat, reluctant even to move, but she needed some space desperately. Rising from the floor took more effort than it should have, and when she was finally up, she was trembling. One shaky step in front of the other, she moved forward in the dark. She held onto her doorway, appalled by how weak she had suddenly become. She made it to the front door when Knoble's door opened and caught her attention. Is everything all right? He sounded wide awake. Yeah, I'm going out for some air, Tsurine answered, to which Knoble was silent for a moment. Okay, I'll be here. His answer was reluctant, ending with a bit of a, but. If she didn't come back in a reasonable amount of time, he would likely come checking. She opened the front door and proceeded to exit into the cool night without another word. How could it hurt even to talk? There was a moment when she wondered if she was even going to make it to the nearest tree, but she made it. But, how was she going to make it to Hall in her condition? She sunk down against the tree and relaxed there enough to fall back to sleep. The breeze that fluttered by and the sounds of the rustling leaves soothed her as the waves of pain ceased after some time. Chapter 8, The Departure. Tsurine, Knoble's voice stirred her then as he came into the clearing with two gorgeous, matching brown mares. Good morning. His voice was clear and warm. These are Sala and Samara. They will be our transportation. Tsurine hid her surprise that the sun was out and he had already taken care of gathering their four-legged duo. That's great, Tsurine said as she stood up without any effort. Unlike during the night, she was feeling decently well. Perhaps better than she had felt in weeks, which made her feel like maybe the worst of it was over. While I was in the city I saw Dr. Hendra. Knoble offered her both reins to pick a partner. He requested that you visit with him prior to our departure. When she picked the mare on his left, he smiled behind his mask as he announced, that one is Samara. Mr. Hayato said she's the most agile. He cleared his throat then, continuing with, seeing as it is early and we are in no real hurry, there's ample time for you to take care of your business before we go. Tsurine held onto Samara's reins and stared up at the beauty, silent for a moment. Had he truly run into Hendra? Or, had he tracked him down and told him what happened during the night? I think I'll do that then. If you don't mind holding on to these ladies. The attempt at being light didn't fall so flat as he took the reins back to tie them up. I'll be here, take your time, he said as he proceeded to go through the saddlebags and organize some of the belongings he had stocked up on and packed up. Tsurine made her way through the city for what would be the last time for a long while. She still couldn't pass by Mr. Morox's bakery, instead she wound around the long way to reach the medical unit. Valérine was standing at the front with a clipboard in hand and her long blonde hair hanging free. Valérine, Tsurine approached and the lady looked up. Is Hendra available? He hasn't been in yet today. I believe he's out in the marketplace. I'm sure you'll be able to find him if you look. She smiled at her comrade before turning and heading on her way. Comforted in a way that Knoble had been forthcoming with her, she departed back into the busy streets. It really didn't take long to find Hendra. He was visiting with Mr. Hayato about a particularly radiant stallion. Good afternoon, Tsurine, Mr. Hayato greeted. Have you come to outbid our local savant? There were few other medics one could hope would arrive first on the scene. I believe I'm well taken care of at the moment, Tsurine answered simply, looking to Hendra. I was actually hoping to visit with Hendra for a moment. The doctor smiled at her warmly, once again without his mask. I was just giving this man a hard time about how expensive this wondrous stallion was. Albeit, whoever gets him will have eyes full of joy for quite some time. Alas, I don't have a stable, but this one to visit. The doctor gave a shrug of his shoulders as the two men bid their farewells. I'm glad you came to see me. Hendra walked up alongside Tsurine as they began to mosey through the village, rounding their way back to the medical unit. Valérine raised her clipboard and smiled at the duo as they walked in together. They circled back to a nearby vacant office. So tell me how you're really feeling. Hendra walked over to the desk with a swiveling chair. He motioned for Tsurine to take a seat in one of the chairs opposite of him. Right now, I'm feeling remarkably well. However, last night I had a horrible episode. I felt as though the very strength in my body left. The pain was terrible. I think Knoble was worried, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him what was going on. She hadn't lied to him, but she hadn't been forthcoming, unlike him who was constantly proving his transparency. I hate to send you with anything that could leave you incapacitated during your travels, but perhaps you require a prescription for your pain. I've got some that dissolve quickly and take effect within a matter of minutes. However, they may leave you partially, or mostly, unable to function properly for a short time. He stated. There was a long pause before Tsurine shook her head. I don't know, what about that seal you put on it? The stare that she received then caused her to take pause. It was squared, and almost intimidating. What's done is done, I cannot do anything for it more. Dread set in then at the implications of the doctor's news. What are you not telling me? This was a moment where she had to be direct and deliberate. What do you know that I do not? An anxiety was building like a balloon about to rupture. The curse you've been afflicted with is one from old Ordenhall ways and it has connections to their royal family. We have very little records of their people prior to the revolution 2 decades ago. However, there are ancient magics and curses that the family used to use to their advantage. They say many of the secrets were lost when Prince Osiris's grandfather passed away with the revolution. Some could cause pain, transformations, and oftentimes death. Hydra answered her firmly, pulling a vial of medication out of his chest pocket. I want you to take these. All you have to do is put one under your tongue and let it dissolve. You should feel immediate relief, if not, take another. However, do not take more than 4 in one day, they are known to have a delayed crash. The medication was set on the table in front of her and she had a choice to make. Was she sure she could overcome the pain each time? She wasn't. Thus, her hand reached out and took the medication to put away in her pants pocket. Thank you. I'll heed your advice and hope I don't have to use them. Rising then, Tsurine gave Hendra a bow. I appreciate your knowledge, consideration, and kindness. Take care, Tsurine. Hendra stood and gave her a bow in return. Come home safely, he bid as she nodded and departed, leaving him standing there watching after her. Knoble, Tsurine came into the clearing of her home to see only Sala and Samara tied up to the same tree as earlier. However, the blue-haired man was nowhere to be seen. She took the moment to go into her home and go to her main bedroom. Under her bed was a wooden crate that harbored a few changes of clothes. She grabbed 2 outfits and shoved them into a woven bag she had. There would be plenty of shallow rivers she could bathe in along the way. When she exited her home, she made sure to pull the door shut firmly. When she returned to the above ground, she still didn't see Knoble. She turned then to look down at her dwelling spot. It had been her retreat for so long. A bow was in order as she bid the small space adieu. Knoble came into view then with a few bags of things. I forgot to grab some things before heading out. I thought I would make it back before you. He went up to Salah and began to load her saddle pouches up with the few assorted goods he had gathered. Everything was wrapped and ready for transport. I got us some dried meats, fruits, nuts and some fresh ingredients for the first couple days. You bring a new meaning to work smarter, not harder, Tsurine observed, causing Knoble to come to a still. He turned that wolf mask to stare at her. Working as a team gets everyone further, Knoble noted honestly, returning to what he was doing. Dallin and Quain are who I would normally go on these missions with, but they were already abroad when I received this one. It's my routine to gather the main supplies for any big travel. At the mention of his team, she could tell that he was quite fond of the duo. I was never assigned an official unit, or team, although Unit 9 had certainly made it known that she was welcomed in their operation areas. Mr. Maroksa would often call me the village outlier. The admittance came as a contrast to Knoble's situation, not that she wanted pity for lacking a team, or the experience of not having one. It's different to have company, she concluded, as she wasn't accustomed to traveling with more herself. And in that case, all she ever needed was a change of clothes, medical kit, and miscellaneous items like her small pot, smoke bombs, knife, and rope. All of which fit right on her person, besides the woven bag with her clothes. Sometimes there are those who operate best alone. I appreciate the company back to Ordenhall. It is quite the journey. The way he said it made it sound as though he had seen some less than enjoyable moments upon his route into Floresia. The trip prior to recently truly was more treacherous. She moved over to Samara who had empty saddle pouches. I've only made the trip there once. And it was hardly a good time. The trade route is the most dangerous path, however King Rulian has dispatched 300 men and women to provide safe passage through. Or, so he said he did. They would definitely be finding out soon. Once they were both mounted and on their way, Tsurine settled into the riding much easier than she thought she would. As the hours drew on and casual conversation about this or that, the two were coming to an end to their first part of travel. Tomorrow we'll reach the end of Floresia's kingdom. That's when we'll reach the Nearfu cliffs. We'll have to leave our horses to one of the next traders heading toward Floresia and continue on foot. That would be what's best for the lovely pair of mares. The rest of the journey along would be far too dangerous for the continued transportation. They stopped in an area where she knew a river ran nearby. She desperately needed a bath and to change into a fresh uniform. They came together and cleared an area for them to set up for the night. Knoble found 2 large logs to lay along the edges of the pit he had dug for his fire. They each had a spot to sit. The way Knoble always knew what to do next was perplexing to Tsurine. He knew what comforts could be afforded and acted on what he could. Do you ever get angry? The question came out so innocently, and the way she was looking at caught his attention. Knoble stood then and tilted his head as though the question made no sense, because of course. He thought of a proper answer before finally nodding. I suppose I do at times. However, I've learned over the years that getting angry doesn't help any situation. I can be angry, resentful, or outwardly begrudging, but I choose to be how I am. There are enough terrible people in this world. I don't need to be one also. When she didn't immediately have a response for him, he resumed what he was doing by gathering his burning sticks and debris to ignite his first flame. You seem as though you handle your existence well, considering what Dr. Hendra told me of you. The flame in front of him was building and he tossed on some more sticks and a log. The two of them sat across from each other, the flames of the fire reflecting off their masks. I have an origin somewhere, but it can't matter when I have to survive today so I can continue surviving tomorrow. I cannot afford to run myself into madness because I don't understand. I just have to keep moving forward. Wherever forward may lead. First it was the trees, then it was Dr. Hendra, then the rest of the city. Now, it's Ordenhall. There was a sigh that followed as she watched the flames lick about the darkness. It's quite the admirable perspective. Knoble's answer came simple enough. I can't imagine the circumstance, however I cannot blame you for your anger. There's a lot of chaos around you. I don't know what it is. Fate's brought us together and I can only hope that our tomorrows will be peaceful. At the mention of fate and peace, Tsurine shrugged her shoulders and arose from her sitting post. Maybe one day, she answered. I'm going to bathe. I'll be back shortly. She crossed over to Samara and grabbed a clean set of clothes. Be careful, Knoble bid her as he watched her retreat. Scream if you need help. He was left to himself and the mares. The fire before him crackled as it shifted from its rich yellows to variants of orange. It was a relatively mild evening and it wasn't too late yet. Once Tsurine was finished at the river, she began her walk back in Knoble's direction. In her one arm was the dirty uniform, and on her person was another just the same. Made of a black wool that was woven with a special spider's web. It was both water and fire resistant, in most cases, and for the most part. She had definitely put her uniforms through many trials, and had to return plenty for replacements. Her hair was still awfully short, but she guessed she was lucky to have any hair at all considering the fire. It had taken a lot of getting used to, yet she had found the convenience of the shortness to be just that, convenient. That was fast, Knoble noted as he was found still sitting by the fire. However, there were now many spears holding meat kebabs. She noticed that the ones nearest him were fish and hers was something else. I got us some food going. Yours are some beef cuts from the city. They're very good at aging the goods. Auden Hall has just enough humidity that aging takes some different approaches. Thank you. The consideration continued to surprise her. I appreciate what you do, Knoble. She took her seat across from him and watched as they continued to cook. She preferred her meats on the well-roasted side. And if you want some, take your pick. I know not many enjoy their meats as dead as I do. Knoble chuckled, shaking his head to her offer. You're welcome. I'm doing what I would normally do if Quain and Dallin, or any other units, were here. Quain's a vegetarian and I am forever struggling to find things that she'll eat. Dallin is fine with anything I serve him. He's a friend every cook wants. He will eat anything and be brutally honest about the quality. He spoke from experience, and the way he spoke about his team with such adoration had Tsurine smiling some. They're quite fortunate to have you on their side. She yawned then as she reached out for a couple of the kebabs. There was a moment allowed to let the pieces cool before she lifted her mask some and took a hearty bite of the meal. Perfect. Nothing but pure satisfaction as she offered Knoble one of the spears, seeing as he had already eaten all of his down. He accepted the one and held up a hand. I'll be rolling around if I eat much more after this. After which a yawn of his own followed. I think I might find a good tree and call it a good night. Tsurine put out the fire once the night grew late. Knoble was just a few trees away with his arms crossed along his chest and his head leaned forward in slumber. There wasn't much commotion around them, and she could see slivers of the night sky through the thin canopy above. The hours passed seamlessly. Eventually Knoble awoke to find Tsurine wasn't sitting nearby anymore. His eyes scanned the area and found her just off to the side. There was something sitting beside her, and after staring for a moment he realized it was a tiger. Knoble arose then, balked at what he was seeing. Tsurine and the tiger were sitting just a ways deeper into the trees, where a tree had fallen, and as he began to approach, the tiger was the first to take notice. Its head turned toward him with a most startling growl. Be nice. Tsurine put her hand into the tiger's mouth undeterred, and the beast chewed on her fingers with the utmost gentleness. That's Knoble. He's a friend. Knoble watched as the tiger's tail tapped about as it returned its attention back to Tsurine. Thanks, he answered as he lingered where he was. I didn't realize Florisia had any tigers left. The many trails he had crossed on his way could have led him into some real messy business. There's not very many, Tsurine admitted as she shifted herself about to be able to see Knoble. I found Amani as a cub after hunters killed her mother and left her to starve. I didn't know she'd stick around so long. But it's been almost 2 years and here she is. The fact that the tiger had followed him all the way and hadn't startled the horses was a testament to the friendship the two held. Tsurine pointed up to the break in the canopy above and to the glistening stars there. Soon those ones will be aligned. She brought attention to the brightest few stars there. There were 6 that were nearly perfectly aligned. Mr. Maroksa was telling me about them. He said they align only once in a few lifetimes. The last time they aligned, he said the earth opened up and Auden Hall was split in 2 before sunken into its current marshes. There was a moment of silence as she reflected on her old friend. He said that's why the Nearfu cliffs are so dangerously steep. It's where the world fell down. Meanwhile, Knoble looked at Tsurine with fascinated eyes. I've never heard that story before. It's a fascinating perspective. He didn't offer an alternative answer, just mused over the legend. There was a large shrug from Tsurine. Yeah, I wouldn't know one way or another. She yawned then, accepting how late it was. I think I'll nap for a couple hours. When the sun comes up, we will hopefully find someone to pass our horses off to. Knoble looked back to where they had left the duo tied up and he couldn't believe they weren't roused from Amani's presence. Sounds good. I'm going back over here, he said as Amani looked at him with piercing amber eyes, as if pleased that he was going. Dawn had come more quickly than she thought, and again she felt quite well after waking. Amani's fur was beneath her face and she was happily warm. Tsurine stood up then and so did Amani, however Amani did not stay. She was quick to depart once Tsurine pat her head and walked back over to Knoble. Good morning, Knoble greeted. A stone skillet was propped up over the flames of a lively fire. There were 6 quail eggs cooking. The smell had been what woke her up. Eggs, they smelled delicious. Morning, she answered as she observed his organization. That sounds lovely. 2 would be fine. Tsurine wasn't accustomed to the new routine, or the constant kindness that flowed from Knoble. Suit yourself. When the whites were cooked and the yolks were just about to solidify, Knoble pulled out his spatula and a wooden bowl. He cut 2 away from the group and scooped them into the dish before he handed it over to Tsurine with a wooden spoon. To a safe journey, he held his own bowl up, which he had scooped the remainder of the eggs into. Tsurine held her bowl up in response. She was waiting for the meal to cool down as she watched Knoble dig right in. How do you not burn yourself? She mused aloud, to which he gave a light laugh. I must have hearty taste buds, he answered with a sly smile in his voice as he took another bite. I would say, hers were cooled down enough that she could enjoy his cooking. When everything was done and the fire was put out, they loaded themselves back up onto their horses. They departed, hoping the rest of their trip out of Floresia would go as smooth as the first leg of it. Sure enough, it was coming along nicely as they were coming up on the cliffs. A traveler was heading their way down the path, accompanied by a couple mules. Good afternoon, might you be heading to the Floresian city? Knoble was the first to speak. The man was a merchant and he looked up at the blue-haired man with a strange expression before exclaiming. I am. The Floresian guards helped me get through the cliffs. There were some folks causing a big stir, but the guards cleared the way quick. I suppose I can. You 2 seem well-mannered enough. Knoble and Tsurine dismounted their mares, taking hold of their belongings and hoisting them over their backs. It was a short exchange, but from there on they would be on foot. Which wasn't so terrible because they set a decent pace that didn't have either of them growing too weary too fast. Chapter 9, The Cliffs. As the day carried on, the skies above began to darken with the threat of rain. We should find a space to stop until the rain passes. When the lightning began and the thunder rumbled around them, Knoble was the first to propose that they settle in. However, Tsurine hesitated. She had become more quiet over the last little while and Knoble had noticed. We haven't seen a single Floresian unit since heading this way. It makes me think there's something occupying their attention. That merchant had spoken about the guards as though they weren't so far behind. They weren't all that far from the end of the trees. Maybe we could keep going a bit. They continued walking forward until light was beginning to fade. They had gone up in elevation for so long that the trees were thinning and the cliffsides revealed themselves. The grandeur expanse of miles of cliffsides and a gorgeous valley below filled with trees and a winding river. It was far more dangerous and time-consuming to travel through the trees. The pass ahead of them provided a safer and faster route to the edges of Ordenhall's marshes. Want to rest here? Tsurine asked as they still had some tree cover. This time though, Tsurine found her ways of helping more. She gathered some wood and dry grass. Together they assembled a rain tarp for where they were going to sit. From there they settled into their space and Knoble went about setting some dried meats on spears and staking them over the fire. I can already feel the humidity. Tsurine griped around one of her kebabs. Everything's going to be hot and sticky. Knoble answered with a chuckle. You eventually get used to it. He spoke from experience as he made quick work of his own kebabs. They were going to have enough food to get him to Ordenhall. He noticed that Tsurine didn't really eat very much, whereas he was used to Quain and Dallin that were nearly insatiable and required him to pack up enough supplies for 5. They hung out in a comfortable sway between casual conversation and silence. As the night drew on, Knoble found himself dozing against his tree. Tsurine was sitting there staring at the fire. Raindrops were falling all around in a light drizzle. The low rumbles of thunder were accented by the bursts of lightning that illuminated the darkness around them. It was peaceful. Until, late into the night, there was a strange sound off in the distance. It came from the direction of the cliffs, sounding almost like a landslide. There was enough of a commotion that Knoble stirred from his slumber. What is that? He asked, staring off in the direction the sound came from. I'm not sure. It could have been AL. That was when several explosions could be heard from ahead of them. The sounds resonated all the way down the cliffsides, followed by the screams of people. Knoble and Tsurine looked to each other for a brief moment before they leapt into action. They raced down the dirt path until they came up on the man-made passage into a portion of the cliffs. It was dark, but on the other side would be the rope bridge that joined their 2 kingdoms. When they came to the other side of the passage, they were met with chaos. There was no bridge. On the opposite side of the gap was a wagon holding people, with more people grouped around the bulls that had been pulling the goods along. They were pulling and screaming, grabbing and crying out. There were men hanging from their side of the bridge as well, screaming out for help and clinging for dear life. Here, Tsurine pulled forth her rope and unraveled it. She tossed an end to Knoble as she hunted for an anchor in her pocket. With the help of a nearby rock she smashed it into the ground. Voices cried out ahead of them and Knoble reached the edge. Hold tight. An elderly man and 2 others clung to the bridge planks as Tsurine came in alongside Knoble. If you can get a hold of this. Knoble laid down on his abdomen to extend his arms over the edge to pass the rope to the man. When he had a good hold on the rope, Knoble began to pull him up. Tsurine got down next to Knoble and took hold of the rope as well. When the elder came close enough, she took a hold of his arm and pulled. Together the two of them got the man up and over the edge. However, one wrong step, her right foot slipped from beneath her and changed everything. She thought maybe her slip and fall would be as simple as landing on her butt. However, she landed on her butt and a portion of the wet earth surrendered beneath her. Everything began to commence in slow motion as instantly she knew, this was it. Even as she turned to try and grab a hold of the ledge, or the bridge planks, or Knoble's hand, everything happened out of sync, just moments too slow. Tsurine could only hear her as she had mere seconds to accept her fate. Chapter 10. Lost and Unfound. Things blurred together after that moment as Knoble was left reeling. Just like that, she fell out of his reach, out of his sight. It wasn't over yet, though. Knoble did a quick look to make sure the men there was safe before he descended back down the way they came. Until he reached a point that he could circle down into the valley below the cliffs. The river at the bottom was terribly wide and with the rain it was flowing much higher than usual. Tsurine, Knoble called out as he began moving upstream. He looked up and saw the cliffside they had been traveling along. He saw where the bridge should have been, and proceeded to keep searching. A thick fog began to fill the entire area as he searched. To his dismay, she was nowhere to be sensed. He didn't give up though as he continued to search the river and surrounding trees for the remainder of the morning. Knoble knew the moment Dallin and his entourage came into the fog. His hope that Tsurine was in the area grew more and more grim, as he waved a hand up, the fog dissipating to grant his team some better visuals. I came as quick as I could. Dallin's emerald eyes were vigilant of their surroundings. Have you had any luck locating Buriek's family? Knoble didn't even know he was supposed to be looking for anyone else. Either way, he hadn't seen anyone. I have not, he answered. I've been searching the area all night and morning and haven't come across anyone. Dallin nodded as he turned to those in attendance, which was 12 others. Spread out and search the area. Follow the river both ways. Florisia has given us permission to search the area. When the others arrive, tell them the same. We are not resting until every inch of this river has been scoured. Like that they all went their own directions. Knoble, you need to report to Prince Osiris. Dallin saw the look in Knoble's eyes and held a hand up. Let our friends keep looking. We need you to come home and explain to us what has been going on. I'm supposed to bring you back, so let's get going. If anyone other than Dallin had come to collect him, he didn't think he would have been so willing to walk away. Knoble knew Dallin well, and knew that he had a powerful birthright that allowed him to manipulate the moods of those around him. Even had Knoble wanted to resist and continue his search, he would have eventually been subdued. He repeated to himself silently a portion of the oath all troops must take before joining the upper ranks. Loyal to the crown ever before the people. And, in that moment, Tsurine was the people, and he had utterly failed her. Chapter 11. Unfathomed. The impact from the fall had left Tsurine incapacitated for an unknown amount of time. She was swept down the river, barely able to catch a ride on some debris before being pushed under the surface. She opened her eyes in the water. She was drowning, yet there was no one there to pull her out. It was but instinct to turn toward the bubbles and push upward like a frog. Eventually she washed up on the bank and was able to pull herself up to the rocks. To her surprise, there was a man just ahead. He was a scraggly man with a crooked smile and dark pinpoint pupils. It's time. The voice was scratchy as he walked forward to join Tsurine on the edge of the water. He reached forward like he was going to help her, but instead he ripped her mask away and crushed it in his hand. No more lies. It's time you knew what you were. Nothing, the man announced as he pulled her up by her upper arm to stand before him. A fraud, a lie, a nobody with nothing, no friends, no family, no loved ones to wonder where you are when night falls. Think about it. When was the last time someone asked you how you were? That's because they don't care. You're like me, the outlier, an outcast, a beautiful power waiting to have purpose. The person could be none other than Raised, and he appeared more crazed as the moments continued. Child, we have so much to accomplish. I'll give you that purpose you crave so much. He grabbed her then by the collar of her shirt, proving stronger than he appeared. He pulled her shirt up to reveal the curse there on her side before he sneered that Hendra thought the tiny seal would prevent anything. Raised spat in disgust as he reached forward and, with one sharpened nail, he nicked Tsurine's flesh there above the mark. Blood spilled over then, and as the single bead made its way over the mark, it flared up instantly. The pain was unbearable. She could only gasp as Raised tossed her aside to tumble over the ground. A moan of agony escaped her lips. It felt as though her life was being wrenched from her body, but worse. It was as though her very existence was becoming consumed by fire. Unholy fire. That was when she realized. One moment she was at the riverside, the next she was in the back of a covered wagon being taken away. The agony was so severe though that she couldn't tell one day from the other. Time became different. One moment she was in a covered wagon being transported, the next she was bound against a wooden wall, across from a pit fire. There were several unknown faces that stared at her as they ate. Tomorrow, we attack. Raised voice came over then as he squatted beside her, the fire illuminating his face menacingly. Are you angry, darling? No one has cared enough to come for you. You know why? Because you were always a pawn. The biggest shame of all is that you don't even know how strong your blood is. You don't realize how little you need any of them. He licked his lips then and stared at her with a ravenous gleam. Stop it, Tsurine managed to say as she turned away from him. The motion though was excruciating, any which way she moved caused that mark to throb unbearably. I just want the pain to stop. To which a cackle erupted as Raised crowded the bound lady. Oh, you have no idea what pain is, lovely. But, everyone that has treated you poorly will know the full extent of your pain tomorrow. Come, Tsurine, let the beast free. You could feel so much better now, if you truly wanted. They never treated me poorly. Tsurine managed to gasp out, panting around the immense pain. She could hardly see straight, yet she stared right at Raised. Lies, he bellowed at her. They used you as bait that I ate up. They wanted to gamble, and I rolled the best. Raised's excitement doubled in that moment as he took a hold of Tsurine's face in his aged hand. Let it out, Tsurine. Let the anger go, let it burn, he exclaimed as he stood back up and raised his arms to the night sky. We'll watch it burn, won't we? His voice reverberated off the wall behind Tsurine as she sank down into the dirt. She listened to the many in attendance as they cheered on the crazed man. It'll all burn, just like Saldian. The evil look that came over the man's face had Tsurine cowering in her position. She fought to breathe, she fought to hold on to her humanity, even as it felt it was being torn away. As time continued on, it only got worse, until finally the sun began to rise. Chapter 12, Day 9. Day 9 arrived and Knoble awoke within his own home in Hall. He had been put on a probationary period due to the failure of his mission. So many events unfurled thereafter, but nothing stuck with him more than the last sight he had of Tsurine. She had reached out for him, and he had missed her hand. He had watched as she descended into the darkness. So high up into the cliffs, it felt impossible that she could have survived the fall. Yet, there was never a single article of clothing, or hint that she had been there. No tracks, or trails, no clues at all. As if she fell through one of Quain's mirrors and into somewhere entirely unrelated. A knock came from his door then and he arose to answer. It was Dallin. Good morning, Knoble greeted as he stepped aside. Come in. Vibrant emerald eyes looked Knoble over as he shook his head. Thank you, however I've been sent by King Orodea to bring you to him. There was a look in Dallon's eyes that made Knoble uneasy. Sure. Yeah, let's go. Knoble shut his door behind him and stared at Dallon. What's going on? He asked as they began to jog toward the beautiful Garnet Castle. A lot, Dallon answered shortly as silence stretched between the two of them. It left Knoble apprehensive as they reached the great garnet and gold-fringed doors. As if on cue, the doors opened and inside the great castle was a startling and horrible sight to behold. King Orodea was standing with his guards at his sides, his sword drawn and dripping blood. Whose blood? Knoble and Dallon's eyes dropped to the ground, finding their prince laying unmoving and bleeding out. The traitors, all of them. King Orodea's voice was deep and resonated far in that moment. It filled the very air around them with his fury. Clean up this mess. King Orodea ordered the men to his side, pointing his hand toward Knoble. You three. In behind them Quain came walking up, her eyes widened with surprise. Gather yourselves and come. It had been months since the king had left his bedroom. His flesh was pale and sickly looking. However, he found himself still a powerful ruler. The dangerous man awoke to discover the disgusting endeavors his son had been participating in while he was incapacitated. He has taken her, he has soiled our lineage, and, you three, were instruments in this audacity. They walked into the great hall adorned in illustrious paintings on the ceiling and tiled floors of rare colors. They continued onward until reaching the throne room with its own great wooden door adorned in royal Hall ornaments. That was where the weary king took his seat. The great doors slammed shut behind the trio as they stood alone with their king. None of them dared to speak first as they watched the wrinkled man's disgust as he stared at them with disdain. My prized warriors, my right hands, and here you've furthered the motives of that bastard. The deep voice reverberated darkly from the very walls of the throne hall. My beautiful daughter, my dearest, there was a broken sound. You must redeem yourselves and find her. You must make right what has been done wrong to her. There was a massive slam beneath his hands. The sound echoed with the elder's anger. Her name is Tsurine Severance. The king stared at the trio as the weight of his words hit Knoble especially hard. You, Knoble Ventanova, you allowed for Raised and his minions to capture her in the raid of the pass. They said it was so easy. The sheer rage had Knoble reeling as everything was thrown down on him. Sire, how were we supposed to protect an individual we didn't know existed? It was Quain who spoke up then. You mustn't condemn Knoble's behavior if he was unaware of the situation. None of us knew you had a daughter, and Prince Osiris. Irregardless, he had her right there. The bellow that answered had each of them braced for the worst. 3 years that bastard had her given to Floresia. Then, on the cusps of her return, raised that son of a worthless whore. He was allowed to capture her. His face was reddening, his voice like a weapon itself. They could feel the force of his dismay. I'm sorry, my liege. Knoble went down on one knee to bow to his king. You are right, I did have her right here, and I have not given up looking for her. She's innocent. The king's voice broke again and despair overwhelmed his anger and he sank into his throne, staring ahead, exhausted by his outburst and the day's events. Take this dragonfly, it'll lead you to where it can. But, they're on the move. Raised and his assembly are acting swiftly. I have multiple units out assessing and assisting with the situation, but the damage is already severe. I need you 3 to infiltrate and bring my daughter back alive. The king's mouth drooped open then and out flew a glistening dragonfly. It zipped over to the fountain at the side of the room. The one that had been installed when Quain became one of the royal family's assets. Her ability to teleport individuals to different sources of water in the region was bafflingly convenient. Well, until its convenience was abused. Knoble arose from his knee and with his team crossed the room to the fountain. Quain's eyes became sources that reflected the world back at itself before a mirror appeared on the surface of the water. Reflecting through the other end was the crossroads to Floresia. They wasted no time in crossing through, however the dragonfly didn't seem to have followed. Whoa, Quain stepped from her portal and swayed with the exhaustion that came from overusing such magics. Dallin was there quickly to catch her arm and brace her through her dizzy spell. I've had to move a lot of people over the last few days. She admitted, but she wasn't going to deny their king and his demands. Not after what she had just seen. Be careful, Quain, Dallin warned. We'll wait some time before using your gift if we can help it. If events allowed for such a reprieve. Dallin looked to Knoble then and said, there sure seems to be a lot of chaos surrounding our new princess. Knoble was having a hard time bringing the thought around that Tsurine had always been the princess of Audenhall. Dallin's observation then reminded him of how he had made the same statement. Dallin had rubbed off on him so much so that he had begun using his mannerisms. It was subconscious, but noticed. Since the first day I met her, she's been encircled in unfortunate event after event. They had surfaced at the crossroads that led either to Floresia or Norenbrook. Last time, Knoble had taken the right-hand path, so he led his team to the left. It's not that far from here. There was an apprehension as Knoble knew things were spiraling out of control and quickly. Whatever had happened between the king and his heir was startling enough. No one had seen or heard from the king in months. So much so, that when Prince Osiris came forward as the new commander, no one questioned the temporary transition. Upon arriving in the city, the trio encountered Dr. Hendra dressed in a deep maroon uniform. Knoble, welcome back, the doctor greeted with a smile that didn't quite reach his deadened eyes. I didn't think you would be back. There was a way about how he said it that had Knoble taking note, as if it were unfortunate that he had returned. We must complete our missions regardless of past occurrences. The answer came curtly as the doctor came up to him and put a hand on his shoulder. Indeed, I know, losing Tsurine has been hard, but it's almost as though she never existed. Dr. Hendra released Knoble's shoulder. No family, no friends, and so disposable for our king. It eats me up. The genuine disgust that crossed the doctor's face had Knoble remembering back to the warning he had given Tsurine and himself prior to their departure. Something felt wrong. Excuse me, Dr. Hendra. I must be reporting to King Rulian. Knoble gave a curt bow before going around the doctor. He didn't tell him about what he then knew about Tsurine. Actually, Tsurine was far from never existing. Her existence had become quite known and she had more friends than assumed. Take care, Knoble, Dr. Hendra said back to Knoble, nodding his head toward Dallin and Quain as they passed him by. However, the way he stared at the two of them had them uneasy. What was that? Quain asked along the way as Dallin walked closer to them in his curiosity. I don't know, but be on alert. I didn't like how it felt. Knoble answered honestly, wondering how much Dr. Hendra actually knew about Tsurine. What was he concealing? Why would he seem disappointed that he and his squad had arrived back to Floresia? Without further distraction, the pathway to the Capitol building was pretty straightforward. The city had cleaned and cleared all traces of Mr. Marox's bakery away. No doubt with plans to build a new shop in its stead. He frowned as he remembered Tsurine diving into the flames unfazed. Everything about the city reminded him of her, not only because she had been his guide, but because they had shared so much time as equals. Even though they had never seen each other without their masks on, he knew he would recognize her white blonde hair and cherry blossom eyes anywhere. Back to the moment, the trio approached the entrance to the Capitol building and Knoble was filled with dread. He had failed his mission. In doing so, what was going to happen? He would still be out searching the valley had his king's orders not taken precedence. His team entered with Knoble at the lead and they walked up to the front desk where a familiar face was. Amphla. Knoble greeted as Amphla smiled up at him. Oh, Knoble, it's good to see you're well. Her answer came as she looked toward the stairs that led up to King Rulian's floor. Go on up. He told me to send you in as soon as you arrived. Because of course it would already be known they had made it to the city. They climbed the stairs and came to the king's doorway. Knoble knocked. Knoble. King Rulian's ire was evident with the one word, come in. He looked to his audience with an intensity as they walked in. It has been 9 days since we last met. There is still no Tsurine to be found. When Knoble was about to speak, the king held up his hand to silence him. We are not here to insist upon any sort of punishment, or recourse, as we do not blame you for her disappearance. However, we have taken it upon ourselves to obtain crucial information. There was a heavy moment where they stared at the king and he stared back. Would they tell him about Tsurine? Captain Haluf. The king spoke then as the captain with the elephant mask stepped forward from the corner. Even though they were stationed to appear like statues and blend inconspicuously, the 6 units had been noticed immediately upon their entrance. Yes, Knoble, it's nice to see you in good health. Captain Haluf began. We accepted a lost soul into our village without knowing her background, without prejudice, and with that level of respect granted to a stranger. Captain Haluf paused as if forming his words. We hope our kingdoms can stay united under the notion that she was well taken care of while in our home. Minus the whole her traveling to Audenhall alone to be plagued by raised, Knoble thought. There was a silence that stretched as the captain looked to the king for a nod of approval to carry on. When the king did just that, he said, in recent days we have been tracking Raised and his entourage through Audenhall. As we speak they are nearing Floresia with the intent of attacking. We have already intercepted the invasive group that your scouts directed us to. We are here now to support our teammate, and assist in carrying out your orders, so long as they do not harm innocent Audenhall lives. It was Quain that spoke, her demeanor straight and confident. She spoke as if the answer had been well recited, expected. We have invested much time into disarming Raised and his followers. They have split up though, we only managed to apprehend one cluster of them. King Oradea hopes your troops will take caution and preserve the nature of neighbors, as well. It was Dallin that spoke then. Should anything go amiss our immediate departure is an order. In other words, their lives were not collateral. King Rulian arose then and held his arms firmly at his side. As allies, and ones that promised aid to each other, how does that qualify? You can help, but you cannot fully commit. Against even your own people that are threatening mine. As leader of his squad, Knoble was the one to answer then. We are our king's servants. As such, if he makes an order, we are not allowed to disobey. We cannot choose to follow your orders over his, however we can follow your orders, to an extent. An extent that you are aware of now. There was a heavy moment when everyone in the room felt the weight. Quain spoke then, if that is not sufficient for you, we will be forced to depart at this moment. Captain Haluf looked to his king waiting for an order, or statement, anything. Gathering himself together, he made a decision then. Go home, we do not need weak allies who cannot provide what we need. We will figure this mess out and spare no one should they enter Floresia. Just like that, the Audenhall squad was exiled from the king's office and city. Things hadn't taken a turn the way Knoble had thought they would, and suddenly he felt lost. He stared ahead as he thought about the circumstances. They had just been expelled from the city and so quickly. Together the trio left the Capitol building, none of them saying anything further until they reached the city gates to leave. It felt different leaving the city that time. Let's regroup ahead. Knoble nodded forward as a familiar smell came over him in that moment. He looked to Quain and Dallin, who also must have smelled the same. It's fire, Quain said, and the three of them began to run forward. They ran down the road until they began to approach the familiar split. However, as they grew near, things were beginning to look awfully different. Everything was turning to fire, and a sudden wave of flames was barreling right for them. Chapter 13, Day 9, Part 2. The pain was unbearable. Tsurine could only gasp before she moaned out with the last of her energy. It felt as though her life was being wrenched from her body, but worse. It was as though her very existence was becoming consumed by fire. Unholy fire. Her silenced scream turned to a screech as Tsurine was consumed by flames, her human form seemingly melted away amid the living blaze. It took only a few moments before consciousness was lost and all that remained was a beast of fire. Rearing up to expose a dragon's many teeth, flames escaped even the cherry blossom eyes that stared straight ahead. Destroy, Raised commanded, and so the beast did as was bid. Flames rolled across Floresia, encompassing everything. The beast she had become barreled forward like a warthog on a mission, determined to wreak as much havoc as possible. Nothing could stand in the way. The first waves of Floresian troops arrived with no way to progress forward. They were driven back toward the beautiful capital city, their resources incapable of stilling the blaze. They needed Unit 9 to hurry and show up. As Raised and his assembly invaded the city, flames steadily grew to consume and destroy everything in the path. Some parts of the city began to crumble beneath the fierce heat. Knoble, Dallin, and Quain had reached the flames at the crossing point before they turned back to the city. That was when they couldn't believe the extent of damage done in such a short amount of time. On top of everything else, they couldn't quite identify the gnarled screech that filled the air beyond them, nor could they see anything that could produce such a horrible noise. Knoble knew he had to station himself as far out of the way as he could so he could provide some sort of aid. In the following moments he summoned massive storm clouds. As they billowed in, thunder began to rumble and the beastly noises out in the burning woods turned to yells in answer. There was pain, the cries, and an anger that extended out in blowing waves. It's to the west, Dallin noted as he and Quain exchanged a look. Go, Knoble told them. I'm going to do what I can to saturate the city. He made a grunting sound as he stood composed in a meditative form. It took a lot of focus to funnel his energy into the task at hand. Dash. It didn't take long before a hurricane-like deluge engulfed the region. The saturation began to extinguish many of the fires, leaving them to smolder. It allowed a momentary reprieve for many of the city residents to evacuate and take shelter. Off in the distance, bellows could be heard, screams and rioters. There was absolute chaos. As Knoble ran along, he couldn't believe it was the same city he had spent so much time in over the last few weeks. An explosion commenced then, and as he turned to look, just as the Capitol building opened up with billows of smoke and flames. Screams followed as more people and militants piled into the crowded streets. Knoble focused on the Capitol building, attempting to direct the rain to bring a heavier downpour onto it. Using his abilities so intensely was taking its toll, but Knoble pressed onward. He joined the fleeing people, heading in the direction of the building rather than away toward the beast. Medic, help, over here, several voices cried out ahead, and he wasted no time in approaching the injured masses. Dozens of people were lying injured, many others were running away as quick as they could manage. He heard the distant screams in what remained of the building and moved in. Amphla. The smoke was thick, yet he had been around enough times that he had memorized much of the front of the Capitol. He pressed forward, and laying up against the wall behind the greeting desk was the injured secretary. Let's get you out of here. He scooped her up and made quick work of getting her outside into the rain and cleaner air. King Rulian was in his office. It happened so quickly. Amphle's bloodied hand grasped at Knoble's arm. Tears ran from her almond eyes, and it took all he could manage to leave her set down against the tree nearby. Stay here, Amphla. Help will be here swiftly. When he checked her over to ensure she wasn't fatally injured, he returned to the smoke of the building. He took the stairs and wound his way up to the next floor. Smoldering debris fell constantly, the smoke was suffocating. That was when he saw a coiled snake mask that lay broken on the ground. A female's limp hand rested on the ground beneath a portion of wall that had fallen over. It was a lot to take in at once as he continued to press forward. Several more bodies littered the area, and it was then that he saw what looked to be the king. Rushing up to the man, Knoble rolled him over and regretted looking at his face immediately. Damn it, he cursed as he looked away and turned the king back to his side. That was when he heard the gasp of a man in the corner. The man had a broken leg and half of his torso was damaged from the explosion. His face was smeared with ash and blood, and he was staring at Knoble. Success. A cough followed. Retribution. Then stillness came. Life left the man's eyes as the smoke continued to clear from the rain above. So much damage done. The roof above the king's office had been completely blown free. Knoble. A mirror opened beside him where a large puddle had formed. Get over here, now. When he didn't at first respond, Quain's voice screamed, Knoble. Shaking himself, Knoble did as ordered. He leapt through the mirror to appear on the other side of the city's walls. There was nothing but chaos. Quain, where's Dallin? Just as he finished the question, Dallin came barreling into him, having been thrown by something off to the side. Knoble and Dallin toppled over together, coming to a stop entangled in each other's limbs. Finally, Dallin groaned out in agony, flames smoldering out as they looked at each other. I can't get close enough to do anything but get knocked back. The fire is too hot. Dallin had already sustained multiple injuries and was bleeding from a scrape on his torso and shoulder. Whatever the beast was, it broke into the clearing then. It was massive with gnashing fangs, a guttural screech, and eyes with pupils the size of pins. The beast opened its jowls then and bellowed out its war cry. Its coiling body launched forward as it exuded the hottest flames Knoble had ever experienced. The pain that expelled from the beast as it barreled toward them came out so ear-piercingly that it felt like their ears might bleed. Even when it missed the three of them, it continued forward, intent on fulfilling its orders. Suddenly, the dragonfly that King Orodea had sent to help them went trailing after the beast. Erring cautiously along the flaming trail, Tsurine, Knoble and Dallin stared at each other as they untangled themselves. They instantly began to run after the beast. Tsurine, fear-filled Knoble as he realized the toll such a transformation could take on its host. Flames rained down then, evaporating the very rain around them. The temperature was soaring from the steam, so much so that Dallin had to stay back. Tsurine, the sorrow Knoble felt in that moment as he pressed forward was all-encompassing. He hadn't been fast enough to save her the first time, he had to be strong enough to save her then. The beast screeched out as it began to barrel its way back. Knoble took a braced stance as he held a hand out to the approaching beast. He attempted to summon the strength to convert all of the moisture around them into something seldom seen. Snow, his true birthright, ice. Glowing blue eyes locked onto his friend's feral form and he moved forward, treading through the flames to come face to face. Silence. His voice was strained, but slowly the beast was becoming overwhelmed by the ice, by the absolute freeze. Just when he thought he was going to have the beast subdued, its cries redoubled, shattering the very ice itself with its screeches. It shook everyone to their bones. In that instant the flames erupted from the very ground itself, engulfing the entire area. Tsurine, Knoble screamed, "Come back to us." The plea was met by a hesitation. Cherry blossom eyes opened wide from within the flames and the dragon's coiled body took pause. He was reaching the extent of his power and went down to one knee. It was then that the flames cleared away from him, away from Dallin and Quain. Away from the charred trees, giving him room to breathe. Her eyes were wide within the flames, but suddenly she came to a halt. That great dragon body swayed and shuddered before its face rose to the sky and a ground-shaking screech erupted to reverberate throughout the entire kingdom. With its agony then came the frantic swing of its massive head, it began to stomp before turning away from the trio. Another screech and they watched the dragon as it went crashing down into the trees, laying as though exhausted. Then came another wave of cries before it arose once more and began to barrel toward Floresia. Quain was there in an instant, her hand grabbed Knoble's arm, bracing him as he shakily stood. "We need to get you back to Ardenhall." That couldn't have been Tsurine. That was a monster. Quain's fear for his safety couldn't outweigh saving their future queen's life. He brushed the assistants off. Those eyes. He was edging ever closer toward exhaustion himself, but he knew he had to believe. Even the dragonfly had trailed along behind her. It's absolutely Tsurine, and they'll destroy her if she gets back into the city. Then there will be no chance of bringing her home alive. There was no more hesitating, he ran forward, pursuing the fire. He would follow his orders, and he would bring his friend home. "All right, you don't want to fall easily. I understand. You're a proud creature, your anger and resentment are felt. But," he muttered to himself as he dug deep into his core and focused only on the dragon. He came to a stop and his eyes began to glow vibrantly once more. In an instant he unleashed his ability upon the beast, the outside of its form was frozen rock solid. It toppled to the ground with a mighty crash and he closed the ice in as far as he could and revealed its serpentine body. "You must relent." A muffled screech came from within the tomb as Knoble sweat, panted, yet walked forward. The rain was able to fall around them, saturating the ground. It was pouring so heavily, his ruined mask finally washed away from his face. The heat had done its damage, and there he was, exposed, staring at his doing. "Knoble," Quain hollered then, "I'm going to open a portal. I'm sending you both to Ardenhall." Her words were followed by one of her mirrors forming beneath the two of them. It was the largest mirror he had ever seen Quain summon. It was so large they had no choice. They fell through and on the other side, they crashed down into the marsh's depths. Just outside of Ardenhall's immediate vicinity. Dash. Tsurine and Knoble crashed into the water below them, and Knoble was quick to surface and move toward better footing. He released the ice that had consumed his friend and stood by. He was trembling from overexerting himself. So much magic caused so much strain on the body. Even so, his attention was on the massive bubbles that surfaced ahead. There was no Tsurine. When the first moment passed, he was already concerned. After the second, he couldn't believe it. There was no time to waste as he raced forward and dove into the murkiest of depths. It took several more moments before Knoble finally resurfaced with the unconscious woman. When he reached the shoreline he was quick to check her vitals. Her body had been ravaged by the flames of the beast. "Wake up." He listened first then proceeded to attempt to resuscitate his friend. Several intense moments passed when water finally gushed out of Tsurine. She commenced to having a terrible coughing fit as Knoble sat back on his heels with shocked disbelief. He stared at her nude back before beginning to remove his vest and his undershirt. He put his vest back on and averted his eyes as Tsurine got her wits about her. Chapter 14. Will it ever end? There was the fall from the bridge, the slow motion descent down the mountain, the painful collision with rock, the roll to water, the sense of drowning. Then staring up at a deranged mug, a smug delighted expression. No warmth was found until pain erupted, until screams were all she could emit from every membrane. Until she finally succumbed to darkness. Then, there was only fire. Hell's fire. Then, her world froze over. So much pain and cruelty had come wave after wave. Even so, Tsurine had found herself staring through a mirror that showed her a flood. Frozen, she sank through the mirror into her tomb. Sunk. Sunk even further, until even light couldn't penetrate the murky waters. Even when she was left to sink or swim, she sank. She realized that her descent would mean that there would finally be an end to the pain. An end to the flames and the ice as her frozen tomb suddenly dissipated. That was when someone came for her. Beautiful blue hair and glowing eyes grabbed and held her close. Gentle arms carried her to the shore, brought her back to life, even if she was immediately struck by the pain of breathing once more. She couldn't bear to turn and look at Knoble, instead she chose to just lay over. Here, Knoble's voice came then and he helped to dress her in his shirt. His eyes were averted in an attempt to give her some sort of privacy. However, it was hardly overlooked that she was covered in burns and deep lacerations. Her one cheek was swelled so badly that she could hardly even see through that eye. I'm sorry, it was the first time she had seen his face and those beautiful eyes in all their entirety. I should have been able to protect you. Tears welled up in her eyes and she looked away from Knoble as he spoke. She couldn't stand to stare at his expression of hurt. I don't need your protecting. She cried then. I don't know. Her arm came to bury her face as she lay on the ground, dressed in Knoble's shirt. Humiliation and guilt were flooding in. They were greeted by a wave of confusion, as darkness was all that seemed to meet her mind's eye upon trying to understand what was going on. Tsurine, Knoble sighed, relieved beyond words as he watched his friend. That she was alive was a miracle. There was a sudden presence and Knoble tensed. Tsurine, darling, a voice came from the thick reeds then, a gnarled-looking man with glowing amber eyes appeared. Devour this man, and continue your orders. Knoble looked to the unknown figure, confused at first, but he moved between him and Tsurine. He would defend her without hesitation. You silly man. The amber eyes looked to Knoble as a menacing grin came to his face. Tsurine, now, you are not done. Suddenly the most blood-curdling scream Knoble had heard expelled itself from Tsurine as she curled up into the tightest ball. Stop it, he bellowed out, trying to force himself to move once again, but coming up short as he could hardly stand back up. However, the agony erupting from his friend spurred him on like a hot iron. Do as I say, demon. The man had to be raised himself. I summoned you, I created you, now obey me. Knoble felt like hell as he moved forward. His discomfort aside, his eyes glowed with a fury he had not felt in decades. Stop it, he screamed out in challenge, his hands opened in front of him and closed around the air in front of the man. Knoble's energies were focused solely on the individual, similar to how he had subdued Tsurine, however this tomb was absolute. The ice compressed around and trapped the dastardly man and blood rained down. The scene was horrific, but Knoble did the only thing he could think of to spare Tsurine. As soon as Raised was no more, he was relieved that Tsurine had fallen quiet. However, the longer she laid there without moving, a new fear arose. Even though he turned to go back to her, his body told him he was done. Tsurine, her name left his lips for what had to be the 100th time as exhaustion was a fast-acting subduer. Knoble's body was wrecked, and as his energy faded he became lost to his pain and weakness. Chapter 15, Damage Done. 2 weeks came to pass and Knoble still found himself in the hospital. He had nearly depleted himself during the recovery mission. Dallin and Quain took turns stopping by to give him some company and keep his spirits up. Is Tsurine alright? There came one early evening when Dallin was sitting across from him that he finally asked. Knoble's voice had been damaged by the smoke from the fires and he sounded quite awful. However, he had been told that the damage was not so severe that he would not recover. There wasn't an immediate answer from the emerald-eyed man. She's as alright as her condition can promote. The way he danced around the answer had Knoble staring at him heavily. It's a steady recovery, but she hasn't woken up yet. We're unsure if she will. It had been 2 weeks. His bandages had come off a couple days prior and honestly the healing was coming along well. However, having seen Tsurine's condition directly prior to passing out he found himself haunted by visions of what had transpired. Take me to her. Somehow he felt compelled to go. He had to. The urgency that struck him filled him with that sudden looming dread. Every moment wasted was detrimental to the situation. Dallon's eyes showed his hesitation, yet when Knoble arose from his hospital bed and grabbed his fluid stand, they departed together and walked down the hall. Dallon led the way to the room that housed Tsurine. 3 guards were there at the entrance to her room, yet they stepped aside at the sight of Knoble's surprising awakening. There was another guard stationed at Tsurine's bedside and she looked at Knoble and Dallon. Keep it short, she said from behind her toad mask. She watched them like a hawk. The way they had her all patched up and hooked up to so many different machines. It tore Knoble up. It was a miracle she was even alive, but was it life if she was stuck like that? Tsurine. He spoke her name and he couldn't recognize himself. He walked around her bed and up to her side to stand. We're home. I hope you get to enjoy it. Tears welled up in his eyes and fell in large wet drops. He couldn't bring his arm up fast enough to catch the downpour. It was the first time he had cried in decades, and he couldn't stop it. It didn't matter that Dallin was there, or the other guard. Knoble was going to say his piece, that would be the only opportunity he got to do so. You shouldn't have had to, his voice cut off, you shouldn't have had to experience these horrors. His own injuries felt like nothing looking at her. She had been subjected to so much, and he couldn't hold back his sorrow for her and his role in her pain. He hadn't been able to prevent it. Knoble, Dallin approached then, his energies creeping out to provide an uncanny comfort. Don't, Knoble pled, however it went unheeded. I'm sorry, it's for the best of both of you. Dallin's emerald eyes were glowing dimly with his exertion. Let's return to your room, Knoble. It was that easy, Knoble conceded, knowing that she was at least alive. Dash. Several more weeks passed by and Knoble was eventually released after completing his many hours of rehabilitation. Report to King Orodea immediately after your departure. He was instructed, which he did. Knoble Ventinova. King Orodea had begun to regain his health as well. He wasn't so gaunt, so dangerously thin. You have proven beyond reason your dedication to this royal house. He did not rise. However, Halamas, his newest assistant, stepped forward with a golden gilded blade. You have earned the Sandrance blade. It will provide you protection against the many forces of evil. I hope you can wield its magic to enhance your existing birthright. Knoble looked over the gorgeous weapon. It was adorned in red and blue gemstones, gleaming with potential. Thank you, King Orodea. Chapter 16. Who am I? Dreams felt as though they stretched on for an eternity, unrelenting. One moment she was standing in the thickest of trees, gazing out across the valley that stretched for miles. The clouds above were painted the most beautiful blends of oranges and reds with shades of purple. Such a beautiful sight to behold, so peaceful and distracting. Until, the sudden eruption of massive winged reptiles that crashed down into her staring silhouette. The next moment she was wandering lost through the hundreds of endless trails of Florisia. She couldn't remember how to get back to her home, or back to Amani, who was probably worried sick for her. Tsurine parted a bush in front of her, and there in the clearing was a man laying. He had the darkest brown hair, and suddenly fear filled her as she tried to say his name, Hendra. Yet, nothing escaped her throat, as flames began to devour the world around her. The flames eventually faded to reveal the brightest blue eyes glowing with rage. Rage aimed at her as ice began to consume her entire being. It was so cold, yet she could do nothing to escape her tomb as she sank. She sank down into the darkest and dirtiest of waters she had ever witnessed. It was there at the bottom of the lake that she came to rest, longing for air and the surface above. When the ice melted away, so did the very water of the lake. Tsurine was left there laying at the bottom of the dried lake, breathing as best she could as faces appeared above her in their customary masks. However, she could not recognize any of them, strangers, even though she had spent 3 years in their company. Slowly her eyes opened and above her was a darkened ceiling. It was daylight, but the lights were off in the room. Through the beige curtain to her right, light filtered through to fill the space with a gentle comfort. Tsurine looked to her left and to the machine that was beeping beside her. It was showing her vitals, and as she looked down a bit, there was a fluid rack that she was attached to. Sitting in the chair beside her was a woman in a toad mask. Her dark blue eyes were hardly surprised. You're finally awake. Her voice came with the customary detachment one developed while being a militant. No warmth or joy would be found from a deadened soul like hers. Was she truly awake, though? Tsurine blinked as she silently stared at the woman's mask as if searching it for answers. That was when the door to her room opened and in walked 2 other masked individuals. One was a hyena mask and the other a platypus. Both were men that looked roughly the same in build and hair color. The only difference she could tell right away was the one with the hyena mask had green eyes and the other had brown. It was the platypus masked man that came right up to Tsurine's right side and pulled forward his stethoscope. Good morning, Princess. I am Dr. Barnaby Ocelot. Can you tell me where you are? He asked as Tsurine turned her face and eyes to stare at him. She was incredibly pale from her time in her coma. When she didn't answer, the doctor continued. You are in the Ordenhall Hospital, and we were assigned to oversee your preliminary recovery by King Orodea. He pulled his stethoscope away with a look of satisfaction as he smiled with his eyes down at her. Everything sounds good, so we are going to commence with getting you fed, and hopefully up and around as soon as possible. You have been bedridden for far longer than is healthy. He was kind, reminiscent of Knoble, yet the smile didn't reach the doctor's eyes as readily. Bo Baranda, our friend with the platypus mask, will be accompanying Atla, our lady here with her toad mask. The 2 of them will be here to help you get up and around over the next few days. With that, we must be getting word to King Orodea of your awakening. Dr. Ocelot nodded to the other 2 before leaving the room once more. As the days carried on, Tsurine arose from her bed a little at a time, accompanied by one or sometimes more escorts. She would walk to her door, down the hall, and then back to her bed. Each day her strength returned a bit more, until at the end of 2 weeks, she was feeling much more herself. One afternoon, Tsurine laid in her bed staring at the curtains that covered her window, when King Orodea came walking into the room. He was accompanied by 2 individuals. One was a blonde lady with grey eyes and a giraffe mask. The other was a black-haired man with emerald eyes and a tapir's mask. Good afternoon, Tsurine. King Orodea's black eyes were as soulless as Atlas, yet they held an even more evil undertone that had Tsurine staring stone-faced at the unwelcomed audience. I am your father, King Dremond Orodea, and these are 2 of my most favored servants. Meet Dallin Wendigon and Quain Pomora. They are also squad mates to your previous escort Knoble Ventanova. At the mention of Knoble and his noticeable absence, a lump instantly formed in the base of her throat. She didn't say anything, staring at the 3 of them with a growing intensity. Don't worry, Knoble is well on his way to recovery, as you soon will be. However, there are going to be quite a few things that must be discussed before too much time progresses. Specifically, I need you to know your place. With an air of arrogance and authority, King Orodea reeked of malice. Her place. Her eyes narrowed at the first threatening undertone. That familiar anger growing to fight the lump in her throat, as she did not take kindly to those who attempted to rule over her. Even King Rulian had been bitten a few times. You are our princess, heir to Ordenhall's great legacy. As such, I have summoned the most knowledgeable tutors to come and begin your classes in the next 2 weeks. We will get you healed up and cultured. Afterward, there will be many things you must learn and abide by. There will be many functions you will be required to partake in and represent our kingdom through. From no one to the representative and heir to an entire kingdom. Dallin and Quain will be present to provide guidance as you begin this next phase of your healing. Their birthrights are most powerful, and I recommend you follow the directions so they do not have to resort to uncomfortable circumstances. Their instructions come directly from me, and as such, I will expect your best behavior and ample submission. Spoken as smoothly as a ruthless warlord, not even a little bit like a father. Yet, he was going to claim that title for himself as well. With a look to his accompanying warriors, King Orodea nodded before pointing to Atla. Come, just like that, the lady in her toad mask arose and followed the king out of the room, leaving Dallin and Quain behind with Tsurine. They were the ones Knoble had spoken so fondly of, and was only for that fact that she was maintaining her silence. Not that they would want to hear what she had to say. Where should we begin, Dallin? Quain stood there staring at Tsurine with the strangest expression in her eyes. It wasn't anger, or joy, but a mix of questioning and disgust. What was the disgust for? Tsurine's eyes locked onto her unerring as she set her brows in challenge. It wasn't as though Tsurine hadn't seen such a look before, as Ampla had often shot her the same look when she thought Tsurine wasn't looking. It fueled that resentment and anger that fought in her stomach for a release. I believe we should start with Miss Tsurine. Dallon's voice was soothing in the strangest of ways. Do you have any questions for us? I know Knoble will be quite relieved to hear of your awakening. His emerald eyes were like beautiful gems, smiling almost as genuinely as Knoble. At the mention of him again, a frown overtook her stone face. Is he well? It didn't hurt so bad to speak anymore, but her voice was still recovering from its damage. He is. He's been making steady progress over the last few weeks. He is set to be released from the hospital in a few more days. However, due to his condition, he will be required to stay on a supervised leave for a period of time. At least he was alive and recovering, she thought to herself as she sighed. Thank you, I'm grateful to know. Tsurine truly meant it, but as she finished the sentence, Quain's eyes narrowed with anger. Tsurine sensed the outburst as it erupted from the giraffe-masked lady. You had best be grateful. He nearly died because of you. There hasn't been a day that's passed that he hasn't. Quain. Dallin turned his face to his teammate sternly. Let her finish, Tsurine managed to say as she stared with a set look at the golden blonde. Her hair was like the golden threads they wove through the Florician king's robes. Beautiful. That he hasn't been the same. The sentence fell off then as Quain's hands balled into fists. Even so, she drug her eyes away from Tsurine and glared darkly at Dallin. He deserves to know she repents for her damage done. She was not herself when these events transpired. You cannot hold someone to account when they were under the manipulations of magic. Dallin didn't want to be having the conversation, but he went unrelented as much as he could before looking back at Tsurine. Even damage done can heal with time, but scars are hard to forget, and I believe each of us now has scars from our battle against each other. Dallin shook his head then and held his hands up. He was needing to move the conversation along. Irregardless, do you have any other questions for us, Miss Tsurine? There is much that Quain and I have been put in charge of explaining to you. No, Tsurine answered bitterly as she simply stayed back and proceeded to listen. She had already hated Ordenhall, and now after being treated the way she was, she had such a great disdain growing for the place. Eventually she would have all of her strength back and she would make her escape. It didn't matter to her what these people wanted from her. It was always the same. Everyone wanted to control her and dictate what happened with her life. She was sick of it. Sick of everyone who wanted to take her free will away and push her into submission. They would not succeed in stamping her out. For now, though, she had no choice but to listen as Dallin and Quain took turns speaking and telling her about all things Ordenhall and the royal family. Why was it that it was these two that were subjected to explaining to her what was going on? Why wouldn't King Orodea take that opportunity to educate his daughter? Why did they continuously dance around Prince Orodea's name? Once you're feeling well enough, we can take you through the market to purchase some appropriate clothing. King Orodea will require you to wear the Ordenhall crests and the royal family's dresses. There are a couple seamstresses that you can meet that would be more than happy to tailor your wardrobe for you. So many things, so many rules and guidelines that she was supposed to abide by. Down even to the way she walked and would be allowed to carry herself through the kingdom. It all sounded like too much for her, too much responsibility that she never asked for and truly didn't desire at all. Yet, there seemed to be some glaring topics that no one was addressing. Her personally, no one was telling her what she really wanted to know. No one seemed to even care who she was. Outside of the images of her they were all trying to curate in real time. It disgusted her. Chapter 17. Reacquainted. Time passed and nothing was heard. Nothing was said. No one saw each other as Knoble endured his supervised leave. Any time he left his home he was accompanied by someone nearby. It wasn't a comfort, as it kept him wondering what was going on in the background. He hadn't spoken to Dallin or Quain in days and the separation had him falling into some dark days. Months passed. To everyone's surprise snow began to fall and cover all of the region. It was a few days into the freeze when Knoble saw Tsurine sitting beside the frozen marsh. Her hair had grown down to the middle of her back, long white blonde strands that curled at the edges. Good afternoon, Knoble greeted as gently as he could, walking up alongside the stone bench she sat on. She wore a traditional dress with the royal crest of a blue and gold flying wyvern. Tsurine didn't turn, she didn't seem to even acknowledge that he had said anything at all. In fact, it looked as though she had frozen into a statue. He was about to leave her to her peace when she spoke. Good afternoon. Her voice was scratchy, reminiscent of how he had sounded weeks prior. It was startling when she turned toward him, her large cherry blossom eyes met his and she stared at him. Neither of them were wearing their masks and it was like that first day all over again. They were feeling each other out, but they weren't so unfamiliar. The sorrow in her eyes, though, was unfamiliar. Never had her eyes seemed so lost and uncertain. She didn't offer any further words as she looked back out to the frozen marsh. He could only imagine how she felt looking at the foreign world in front of her. He thought back to what she said once and stared ahead. She just went with what was in front of her. It'll be okay, he comforted, standing to her right. Thank you. Her voice was so quiet, yet he felt her appreciation. They spent many more days together once reacquainting, watching the frozen marsh defrost as the unusual cold slowly ebbed. Florisia is demanding answers, Tsurine said one cold evening. She could feel Knoble's eyes as he stared at her with great concern. A deep sadness washed over her demeanor and she sagged. I had nothing when I first awoke to the trees. Dr. Hendra was there offering me a path into life. So I accepted it, she managed without looking at him. He was the only person to ever try to give me such a path, more than I can say about these people. There was no elaboration. I want to give up. The words came out as though she were on the brink of tears. The admission took Knoble by utter surprise. I've been a lost cause since I opened my eyes. I don't know why I'm where I am, I don't know why I exist, and it's hard to move forward when there's nothing left leading me onward. Just lies and the wants of others. She was only staring out toward the iced-over water. That was when she arose from her seat and finally looked to Knoble. I'm sorry you had to become involved in this mess of confusion. She took a step away from him. Don't worry about me. I'll figure out my fate in all this. Tsurine attempted to conceal her pain, but he saw it in her every slow and meticulous movement. Tsurine, please, allow me to help you, Knoble begged, feeling he was on the brink of insanity. The months were getting harder to cope with as answers were never found. Apparently little answers had been given to Tsurine as well, as she too was suffering. He stepped forward and took a hold of her hand. He wanted so badly to protect her, to give her the answers she needed. Whether it was in his best interests, or not. I want to help you. Tsurine stared at her hand in his and let it fall away. I know you do, but I don't want your help. I don't want you to get hurt anymore because of me. If I cannot make things right, Please, you're not some rogue anymore, Tsurine. You are the future queen of an entire kingdom. You have any and all of us to do what you need done. You don't have to continue living as though you have to do everything on your own. Knoble was struggling to understand her unspoken intentions. There was no reaction from her as she stared away at the water. Thank you, Knoble. The voice was tired and defeated. I need to go. The way she turned away without anything further, the way she intended to leave him standing there alone. He didn't know what he could say to make her stay, so he just watched her as she retreated down the road. It wasn't long and an accompaniment of masked Audenhall guards followed behind. Chapter 18, Prosecution. Everyone believed it was going to warm up, but snow fell more and the marshes froze solid. It prevented easy transportation throughout the region. It was the first sustained freeze the marshlands had seen in decades. Even with the sun being high in the sky, there was no warmth to be found accompanying the rays. Knoble sat at his own table at his favorite diner. He had ordered a simple breakfast and was awaiting the meal when he noticed two individuals walk in. When the female looked over at Knoble, he instantly recognized the coiled snake mask. A flashback erupted then and he recalled seeing her still hand beneath the great wall of the king's office. You look like you've seen a ghost. Second Captain Linden approached with a figure wearing a boar mask. He didn't have any hair, and his build was intimidating in comparison to his female partner. Perhaps I should be looking at one, Knoble answered calmly as she scooted into the booth across from him, joined by her silent follower. Captain Haluf is now king. With that knowledge, charges are being formalized against King Oradea, you, Tsurine, Quain and Dallin. There are others that are being gathered as we speak. That explained the daunting partner accompanying her. But, how would they just walk in and apprehend the king and his heir? In the following moment, Audenhall troops came pouring into the diner. They were quick in apprehending Second Captain Linden and her escort. However, it came as a surprise when the duo did not fight back. Knoble, Halamas came in as the majority of the troops began their departure. You must come with me. Our king has summoned you. The man wasn't as kempt as usual, appearing more frazzled than ever before. Lead the way. Sorry, Lorien, I left the money on the table. Knoble made sure to catch her attention before departing. He would have to collect his meal another time. With all the going-ons, he had lost his appetite anyway. They moved swiftly through their city, heading toward the castle. To Noble's dismay, the west wing had caught fire, reminiscent of his time in Floresia. Thankfully, there were dozens of operatives on the scene. When they arrived to the great doors and proceeded inward, the castle interior was in utter disarray. Statues lay over broken, paintings lay on the ground. What had happened, and why had he not heard anything go on? They passed through the second door and in front of Knoble and Halamas were a dozen men and women in Floresian uniforms knelt down in front of King Oradea. One of them was Second Captain Linden, and to his surprise another was Dr. Hendra. Many of the people looked like they were from Unit 9, the group that had taken Tsurine when she was one of them. Knoble Ventinova, King Oradea greeted him as Halamas led him in. Yes, my king. Knoble stood at attention with his hands flat to his side. These are raised spies. The news came as a shock. They claim to have been the ones to organize the Floresian king's premature departure. Their leader, Gryant Haluf, is currently residing as our neighboring king. He thinks these individuals will bring all of us back to face prosecution for our roles in their king's demise. Even though they are raised operatives. In other words, they weren't seeking penalties for their King Rulian's demise, but their King Raised's demise. Knoble wondered then how deep the mutiny was within King Rulian's world. How many were complicit, and how many were needlessly sacrificed for the change of power. A sickening feeling arose as steps approached from behind. We can't find them. Halamas looked to another of the king's assistants, Jera, Tsurine, Dallin, and Quain, each unaccounted for. It sounds like they left late last night. A Breva Hyuk informed us they were heading to Saldian. Knoble met the king's eyes, confused, but King Oradea was indifferent. His eyes were locked on the group in front of him, as if he was gauging out the might of his foes. Saldian was destroyed by King Rulian's forces nearly 2 decades ago. King Oradea answered. Precisely why the rebellion occurred at all. Second Captain Linden answered. We are the descendants of those who were burned away. It was only fair that they experienced the same fate. It was daunting to know the truth after so long wondering what was amiss. No wonder they were so protective of Tsurine. They hoped she would side with them in the rebellion, and indeed she did as their weapon. There was still a lot Knoble didn't understand, but things were beginning to click into place. Needless to say, we will not be conceding, King Oradea answered, staring with a darkness growing in his eyes. You used my innocent child. Your rebellion has committed the worst sins by taking advantage of my bloodline. Nefarious in all ways, we could never align with Floresia again. Not after what your cause has accomplished. The damage has been done. In an instant roots erupted from the tiled floor and confined the unsuspecting audience. It's a cursed existence we live in, isn't it? King Oradea's eyes glowed with his disdain, as black as the night sky. I sold my soul to the devils of Audenhall as soon as I heard of the horrors being committed. Birthrights are hard to come by, but they can be quite useful if you're strong enough to survive their implementation. Now, one by one each of the members were dragged down into the earth beneath them. I will get my own retribution. Knoble's eyes glowed as he acted with his leader by summoning a sheet of ice to protect his king. As the events transpired, the members reacted and fought back. Second Captain Linden severed the roots from her and her surrounding teammates, including Dr. Hendra. Once freed, they split into small groups and war broke out in the castle. Knoble was reluctant to engage the people he had gotten to know over the last year. However, as the moments ticked on, realization after realization came to mind. They had attacked Mr. Marox's bakery, they had spurred Tsurine on to participate in such a horrendous attack. They had orchestrated her abduction at the pass. Anger fueled his ice's fury as he ensnared many in opposition in their final ice tomb. Until, Dr. Hendra came in behind Knoble and with a might punch sent him to the ground stunned. All you had to do was stay the nice guy, now you're just another enemy. Dr. Hendra's eyes were like barren deserts as he prepared to decapitate Knoble with the sword in his hand. However, in an instant, a new presence arrived. Flames filled the room, physically taking hold of Dr. Hendra and thrusting him away like a ragdoll. Everyone came to a sudden still as Tsurine, Dallin and Quain all entered the room through the fountain to the side. And I am just another enemy as well. Tsurine's voice was concealing all her emotions as she deadpanned her once allies. To hell with you all. Her disdain for the team echoed with their screams as she cooked the remaining opposition to ash. By fire like all the rest of your people. The coldness in which Tsurine took their lives had Knoble concerned. We came as soon as we could. Dallin spoke, seeming to be focused on Tsurine. His eyes were glowing dimly and Knoble knew he was attempting to keep Tsurine calm. However, the hurt on her expression could not be readily concealed. Tsurine looked to Knoble then, and her face was stoned. Everything is always about retribution, she said to him, but she was referring to King Orodea and Ray's followers. It's the fuel for all violence. Even now, I've gotten retribution for Mr. Marox's demise. Does it make me feel better? Not at all. Dallon's expression was also concerned as he stared at Tsurine. Retribution is the only thing that matters after someone has wronged you, Tsurine. King Orodea said. I have done irredeemable things in order to get retribution for your treatment, and I'm not done. The king looked onward as the great doors beyond opened and dozens of Ordenhall servants moved into the room to begin restoring its order. There's still that Captain Haluf. The king looked to his daughter as her hands trembled visibly. Without his demise, our kingdom will cease to be safe while he rules Floresia. None of them really knew how the transition of power worked in Floresia, but if Captain Haluf was able to become king so easily, the power structure must be relatively straightforward. His second captain has already perished, so the chain of command has steadily shrunk. Halamas stepped forward then. Please excuse us as we regain ourselves. I suggest each of you take some time to rest and regroup as well. We will discuss our options promptly and summon each of you again when we have our plan settled. Until then, go. Extra content. There was nothing to look back to, nothing to look forward to. Everything had been a lie. Everything had been made a mess. She didn't know what she could do about it. What was there to even consider as an alternative? She stared out across the cliffside, the many trees below in the winding river. What was there when there was nothing left? How could there be a future if there was no past? No matter how hard she pressed, she never received answers. She had begged, she had demanded, she had gotten nothing. Just a cold and distant stare. The rain began to fall heavier as she stood by for a long while. You are loud. I did not allow anything. King Orodea arose from his seat then. Now, cease your questions. I cannot protect you if you continue to insist down this path. Protect me? From what? Yourself? It's not on me that you slaughtered your own son, King Orodea. It's not my fault that I was born to a peasant who couldn't even protect the woman he loved. The words instantly reminded her of Knoble and how he had pleaded to help her. Silence, you ungrateful child. This family's future is secured in your existence. Now, you need to cease your nonsense and begin acting as your role demands. Tsurine was seeing stars as she glowered at the stranger on his throne. A father he was not. To hell with you. I never swore an oath of servitude to you. I never swore fealty to anyone. The rage she felt boiling erupted as she turned to stride away from King Orodea. The very ground began to shake as the king screamed out, "You will do as I say." His eyes were stern and glistened with magic. That was when roots erupted from the tiled ground and apprehended Tsurine. Or, you will be grounded. The way he said it, reinforced by the unfathomed moment. To hell with you. Anger had always been her first instinct. Anger and violence. Tsurine screamed out at King Orodea as fire suddenly erupted from her entire body as she willingly took her form as the massive fire dragon. She would not be apprehended by the king, or anyone else, ever again. She would burn everything down before she conceded to the control of another crazy man. The massive tree roots erupted from beneath her, entwining her body as the garnet castle around them began to crumble. A protected sphere kept King Orodea safe, but the falling garnet ceiling and tree roots throttled Tsurine into the ground. Her flames were not to be extinguished though as her rage fueled her next explosion of fire. Screeches erupted from her that sent massive fire waves scattering out, destroying everything in front of her. Dozens of Wardenhall troops were arriving on the disastrous scene around. More tree roots erupted from the landscape and whipped out to apprehend her. They coiled around her legs, her body. Suddenly an ice dragon reared up from the marsh just beside Tsurine. It could belong to no other than Knoble. He could be seen rushing toward the battle from down the way. An embarrassment flooded over Tsurine as she anticipated the worst. If he joined the battle against her she would not. The ice dragon moved forward and attached itself to the tree roots, freezing and proceeding to compress and destroy them. With her freedom returned, she looked to Knoble who was quickly being apprehended by his peers. She couldn't let them take him for his mutiny, not when it was in her defense. Tsurine turned away from the king and dove down on her newly made enemies. To hell with them all, except Knoble. She morphed back into her human form and her clothes were intact this time. Keep up, Tsurine said as she kicked one unit away, flipping another over her tiny body with what might she could muster. She didn't have to say anything else as they found a break and made a run for it. They were heading straight south, losing their hunters for a moment. You're a crazy man, Tsurine eventually said, looking over at him with surprise. As soon as I saw the fire, I knew it was you. Knoble admitted, so I came. And here we are, fugitives. Tsurine sighed. Thank you for coming back for me. I know you would rather go alone. There was a sideways glance from him that accompanied the statement. She continued to lead him south. I condemned King Orodea for not being able to protect the woman he loved. Because he would not rise to the occasion and he allowed Talia to be, Tsurine realized then that Knoble didn't know what Tsurine had found out. He allowed King Rulian's forces to invade and erase her legacy. Everything but me, anyway. Knoble was silent for a long moment, staring at Tsurine heavily. When the woman they love will not allow him to help, are they truly to blame? The answering question came as a reminder of how stubborn she was. Perhaps it is hereditary, she answered honestly, looking away. The two of them fled to Saldian. All they found for miles were ruins. Toppled stone pillars and garnet statues littered the ground and their once glory could only be imagined. They looked to a fully preserved face and Tsurine was startled by how closely it resembled herself. What were the odds that she would have Knoble there with her as she made these discoveries? How fortunate was she that he was a truer ally than she ever fathomed possible. They had been through so much together, and they had come out on top. Even then, as they wound their way through history, they had come out on top by escaping together. You're not technically a fugitive, Tsurine said then, you're serving the royal house, according to Orenhall. If nothing else, maybe that'll save you. It wasn't as though there wasn't a chance for failure in being captured. Maybe he could find leniency. The night was growing late and they were both in need of rest. It had been a long journey thus far and they had been well unprepared for this endeavor. Let's call it here. There were some downed pillars that offered plenty of cover for them. He went about his usual habits and gathered materials for a fire. Tsurine helped clear the area he had chosen. She fetched some good logs for sitting before slipping away into the shadows. Before Knoble could become worried, she was coming back with 3 rabbits. Tsurine took out her boot knife and proceeded to skin the meals and pass them over to Knoble upon completion. He was left with skewering and planting him along the fire where he saw fit. There was a silence that stretched between them as they settled into their foreign environment. It was haunting and the rustle of leaves and the blowing of brush about had him ever alert. You know so much about me, and yet I don't know much about you. Tsurine wasn't asking for him to explain, but she let him know that she had taken notice. You're a talented warrior with a kind spirit, your birthright is flexible and valuable. I assume you're from Eukorian, a descendant of the Galexian family, but I never found out if you were a rebel or ally. Knoble smiled and lifted his eyes to her before offering a shrug. You're not wrong, he agreed, leaving the conversation suspended in the air for a moment. My great-grandmother was the youngest daughter of the Galexian family. My family was well away from the riches of past generations, when it came to be that I inherited a birthright and violence was incurred. Afterward, I ran away from my home. Later, I was taken in by King Orodea, who assigned me to Prince Osiris as an ambassador. That's why you were sent to Floresia? Tsurine wondered. Some time later, yes. However, Prince Osiris assigned me to head Dallin and Quain on several missions before also assigning us as our own unit. We had been together ever since. She wondered how they felt about the suddenness of everything. They probably think I've corrupted you. Knoble didn't argue, looking into the fire. Quain believes I'm acting irrationally. Perhaps I am. However, I've always done what felt right in my heart, and following you was what felt right. I gave an oath to protect you, and failed once. I don't want to repeat that mistake again. I won't hesitate to act on your behalf again. The seriousness of his words had her staring at him quietly for a moment. I don't know what I did to earn your respect, but I consider it in what I do now. She looked away. It's why I went to you. I saw you coming and knew I had to. The night drew on and they took their turns resting, starting with Knoble. When he awoke, Tsurine was staring up at the night sky with the most perplexed expression. He watched her for a moment as she seemed to be searching the stars, then he moved and her attention shifted to him. It's a beautiful night, she said lightly. Knoble smiled at her and nodded. Indeed.